Okay, we are live here in Myth Vision Podcast. We're going to have this discussion, this debate, whatever you want to call it, a friendly conversation, yet two opposing views on whether or not Christianity is logical for modern society. Let's get the party started. We are Myth Vision. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in today. We have a debate discussion, and I have a few special guests. I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves on is Christianity logical, especially for modern civilization. So we'll start with you, Selah. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, what brings you to the table today.
Sure. Well, hello, my name is Selah Cordova. I've been competing in speech and debate for 5 years. We've had topics ranging from federal prison to the European Union's migration policies. I've also competed in apologetics for 5 years, which involves defending my Christian faith. I'm really excited about today and getting into this discussion, and I'm really excited to get to do it with Dr. Bird.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your introduction. And Dr. Jennifer Bird, if you don't mind, introduce yourself, what brings you here, etc.
Okay. Hi, I'm Dr. Jennifer Bird. I am a biblical scholar, so my PhD is in New Testament and early Christianity. I have a Master of Divinity from Princeton Theological Seminary, a BS in mathematics, if that matters to any of you. And I have a background. I grew up in a Christian setting, a Christian church, United Methodist. I have a very conservative 7 years of my life in very, very conservative evangelical world and thinking. And that's what sent me on to seminary. So biblical languages, the texts themselves, wanting to engage them for myself is what sent me on to graduate school, seminary and graduate school. So I'm here because I have enjoyed my conversations with Derek, and he asked me if I would do this exchange or conversation with Selah. And, why not? So I'm here, and I love to talk about what people are doing with biblical texts. And I know that will be a part, not the only thing, but that'll be a part of what we're discussing tonight. So I'm looking forward to having this exchange with Selah.
Wonderful. Thank you. These were awesome introductions. I look forward to seeing what is going to become of this. So for those of you who are tuning in, if you want, super chat your questions, and we will get them answered during Q&A. We're starting with a 12-minute opening. We're going to have Selah go first, and then we're going to allow Dr. Bird to have 12 minutes. Then there's going to be a rebuttal, 6 minutes from Selah, 6 minutes from Dr. Bird, and then an hour open dialogue where I will only interject if I feel that I need to allow the other side to kind of have conversation back. Sometimes we tend to get excited, and so I want to allow each side to do this. So please, I ask everyone in the chat to not be derogatory, engage in the argument, not the person. And so let's have some fun and set our timers here. I'm going to disappear because I'm only going to get in the way, and allow you two to stay on the screen. And go ahead and set your timer. Let's do it.
All right, well, I'll go ahead and begin then. Is Christianity the logical worldview for society? In answering this question, we need to initially take under consideration that approximately half the Roman Empire claimed allegiance to the Christian faith by 400 AD, saying it was a logical worldview. This represented over 30 million people stepping away from the Hellenistic philosophy of the Greek and Roman world, which had been the foundation of the people in its academic institutions during the better part of 600 years, to turn to the Christian worldview. This is especially true among the learned class of society, to include such men as Justin Martyr, Tertullian, Augustine of Hippo, the Cappadocian Fathers, Constantine the Great, and others. Additionally, it was no longer logical to worship the emperors as God. In fact, the Emperor Constantine at Nicaea honored the confessors of Christ who refused to bow to Caesar during the persecution. This was the first step towards a constitutional system that was later made known by Richard Hooker, John Locke, and the United States Constitution. We also see the emphasis Christianity placed upon humanity in contrast to the pagan value systems. From the pagan worldview, according to Tom Holland, the starving deserved no sympathy. Beggars were best rounded up and deported. The heroes of the Iliad, favorites of the god, had scorned the weak and downtrodden. The Christian value system had changed all this, was a God that was closer to the weak than to the mighty, a God closer to the poor than to the rich. At the heart of this value system is the Christian worldview that human life possesses intrinsic value because we are created in the image of God. Life was deemed sacred, a perspective which explains why the earliest Christian writings took such a bold stance in the protection of life by condemning the practice of abortion or destroying the infant after birth. Before passing judgment on this Christian position, we must remember what the Greek and Roman civilizations, the mainly pagan worldviews, had sanctioned in its worldview. In his Republic, the Greek philosopher Plato records a conversation of the philosopher Socrates, who argued that infants which are born with any disability must be killed, and that for the good of society, women over 40 years old who conceive children must abort the child before birth or kill them after birth. In the same vein, Aristotle wrote that the following laws must be made about abortion and the deliberate exposing of newborn children to death, and that no deformed child shall live, and limits should be placed on childbearing since neither serve the interests of the state. We also see a similar worldview among the Roman Empire from the writings of Cicero, Ovid, Seneca, and others in its society. However, despite this worldview, some of the most respected and legal voices of these civilizations spoke out against the practice. For example, Cicero attacked abortion as a crime against the father, the family name, the Roman state, and the human race in general. These sentiments were also echoed by the Roman Stoic Rufus, who argued abortion was a crime against the family and nature. The Emperor Caesar Augustus promoted childbearing instead of abortion and infanticide in order to build a strong Roman state, while the Emperor Septimius Severus and Antonius Caracalla made abortion a crime. Pliny the Elder opposed abortion on accounts of his high moral standards. Even Aristotle understood that abortion must be procedured before sense and life have begun, and what may or may not be lawfully done in these cases depends on the question of life and sensation. Moving on, the Christian worldview also brought about the idea that the world was created good, so we can now study the laws of the universe and trust them, a concept found in the writings of Sir Francis Bacon. Tom Holland also points out it was through the Christian worldview that led to the emergence of science in the 19th century, a field never truly realized in the ancient world, considering for Greeks, the material world was evil or of a lower order, which explains why Aristotle did not pick up the rocks to see which one dropped faster, but Galileo did. The Christian worldview also paved the way for freedom of rights, freedom of religion, and separation of church and state through the Puritan wing of Roger Williams' interpretation of Scripture. Recall, Roger Williams set up the state of Rhode Island as the first place in modern history where such separation of church and state was implemented. Williams argued from Scripture that it is the will and command of God since the coming of Jesus to create an equal place in society for all consciousness to worship freely. One of Williams' central arguments asserted that the more informative Old Testament examples of civil government were good non-covenant kings, such as Artaxerxes, a pagan who gave the Hebrews freedom to worship in Ezra 7, but did not compel any kind of worship. Williams' notion of, quote, a separation between the garden of the church and the wilderness of the world, end quote, inspired John Locke and the founders of the United States, who incorporated the principle we now know as a separation of church and state into the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Furthermore, the framers of the United States believed this worldview was a logical one to build our nation upon. According to Lutz, the Bible was the most frequently cited book in the political literature of the American founding era, surpassing all secular writers. As Jefferson, aligning with the biblical ideas of moral truths and law, and of mankind's dignity and fallen condition as found in the Sermon on the Mount. As a result of the explosion of the Christian worldview in history, Dr. Ehrman has stated that the triumphs of the Christianity proved to be the single greatest cultural transformation our world has ever seen. And we would never have had the Middle Ages, the Reformation, or the Renaissance as we know it without Christianity. All things considered, most would agree that the aforementioned ideas of the Christian worldview are the logical and practical propositions for society as a whole. However, the real divide is over the notion of the supernatural. Keep in mind, most civilizations up until the time of enlightenment believed in gods or the Great Spirit. Therefore, is the enlightened reason of the 18th and 19th century the logical propositions for society? Again, we have to take in consideration the statement from Nikolai Berfe, who noted that it was detached itself from the experience of humanity and broke communion with the reason of universal history on this issue. I say no. The state of morality and moral order would hang in the balance, given the idea found in Descartes that without God, all things are permitted, become a very real threat in society. Given the recent events in our country with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, I feel it's important to take the following into consideration with respects to abortion from a Christian worldview. Numerous stories pile up about mothers who are encouraged to abort their children because of their financial security, Down syndrome possibility, and numerous other justifications. Yet these mothers believed that life had intrinsic value and had their children, including household names such as Steve Jobs, Justin Bieber, Tim Tebow, who has helped in orphan and human trafficking nonprofits, and even the opera singer Andrea Bocelli's grandmother was encouraged to abort her mother. We have come to this idea of questioning whether life has inherent and priceless value. If life has no value and is only based on this Darwinian worldview, where the survival of the fittest rules supreme, all injustice would be justifiable. A man who is older, stronger, more financially stable could rape a 14-year-old girl and call it part of his instincts, him having more value as someone older and more powerful than another life. As Richard Dawkins, famed atheist, makes very clear regarding his moral code, quote, "In a universe of electrons and selfish genes, blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason to it, nor any justice. The universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference," end quote. This is the primary question. Does all life have inherent value, or can society decide some standard of when life has value and how much value? White supremacist groups subscribe to the later worldview, deciding who has value and who does not based on the color of your skin, as did Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood. Iceland has almost eradicated Down syndrome, parents saying that they were ending the possible life of a child that could have suffered. In other words, the decision that someone has the right to life is based on whether others believe that you will suffer. If we use this logic, all elderly prisoners and those who are mentally disabled should have no right to life. Nowhere am I denying that mothers and fathers also have incredibly valuable life. In fact, organizations and NGOs are set up to help mothers who may be on their own. And as according to American Adoptions, quote, 36 waiting families for every one child who is placed for adoption, end quote. The mother is not alone when it comes to making a decision for her child, and her value is not based on the child, but each life is inherently valuable and loved. This is exactly what the biblical worldview is supporting, that from conception, each life has priceless value because of our Creator. As what Jeremiah 1:5 states, quote, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart," end quote. No matter your past, gender, disabilities, race, or beliefs, you are to be respected and given liberty to life for the child, father, and mother. Our emotions, finances, and personal comfort are not sacred. Life is. Thus, abortion is not something that stands by the Bible, nor is a logical aspect for society. Personal accountability to one's actions and having set standards are truly the importance for the goal of life. As what the British atheist reporter said in 2008, quote, "Now, as a confirmed atheist, I've become convinced of the enormous contributions that Christian evangelism makes in Africa, sharply distinct from the work of secular NGOs, government projects, and international aid efforts. I used to avoid the truth by applauding, as you can, the practical work of mission churches in Africa. It's a pity, I would say, that salvation is part of the package, but Christians, black and white, working in Africa, do heal the sick, do teach people to read and write, and only the severest kind of secularists could see a mission hospital or school and say the world would be better without it. I would not allow that. If faith were not need to motivate missionaries to help then fine. But what counted was the help, not the faith. But this doesn't fit the facts. Faith does more than support the missionary. It is also transferred to his flock. This is the effect that matters so immensely, in which I cannot help observing," end quote. As shown in early church from the pagan worldview and in the 21st century, is the Christian faith that leads to actual love and charity of human life. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I got the timer on here. Now we kind of know where this debate's headed. Didn't know exactly with the title, to be honest. I was looking forward to seeing where we would go with this. So, Dr. Bird, you have 12 minutes. I'm backing out, getting my timer going as well. I hope you do. And if not, keep an eye on the private chat. I will let you know, like, if you're needing to like peek at it, you can know how much time you have left. All right, backing out, and your time is starting.
Well, right. So I did take a slightly different approach to this, but I think that Selah and I will be able to kind of come back and meet in the middle here in our rebuttals or responses to each other. So I did want to start by noting that I'm not a big fan of proof texting because I don't find throwing biblical passages out there to be helpful unless we can all read through them together. Part of the reason I note that up front is because that used to be one of my main go-tos when I was having conversations, theological conversations or debates, is to quote scripture out of context. So, and it turns out that from my perspective, the primary issue tonight on the question of is Christianity a logical worldview for modern society, from my perspective, this issue actually boils down to what lenses we use to read, whether that is reading the history that Selah so nicely reviewed for us, or some of the pieces of history, I should say, the lenses we use to read that, or the lenses we use to read scripture. And in this particular context, given that it's about Christianity, I'm going to refer to the Bible, and I mean the two primary Christian testaments by that. So Old Testament, New Testament, I refer to them as the Hebrew Bible and Newer Testament, but I'll just call it the Bible. So for me, the primary issue is actually what lenses we use to read, not which religious tradition we are part of, or even if we are a part of one, because Christians do not have the corner on morality and ethics. So to be honest, the first two thoughts that went through my mind when this conversation was posed to me was two questions. What do we mean by Christianity? Because, as in, which version are we talking about? And how are we going to define the worldview that it espouses? Since there isn't just one form of Christianity in the world today, there isn't one worldview that all Christians endorse. The reality is there's a spectrum of Christian stances in response to any issue that might come up tonight. In in keeping with what Selah did, in a sense, the most pressing topic for most of us right now, right? Let me just note that on the pro-life issue, for instance, I happen to know quite a few people who consider themselves faithful Christians who are pro-life and thus are also pro-choice, as they support safe access to abortions. They are pro-life and they would like to do away with the death penalty. They are pro-life and they want to help support people in their ability to provide safety, clothing, and food for their families. These are friends of mine who believe that the label pro-life should apply to the whole lifespan of humans involved in the situation, particularly to those already living outside of a uterus, and not just to whether a fetus is allowed to become a viable human. I have a HuffPo piece. I'm not going to post it now, but I was thinking I would. But I have a HuffPo piece further clarifying that pro-life, as the label is typically used, is a highly misleading label. So I asked myself what the real issue is here, right? Is it that the loudest voices influencing public policies are of a certain stripe of Christianity in this country, and thus many people equate Christianity with conservative views, as at least one Gallup poll would suggest? And if that's the case, then we should do some educating around the possibilities of Christian expression and communities that exist in this country and around the world. I could share lots of resources with you about a wide range of Christian expressions. Because today, in the year 2022, conservatives do not have the corner on Christianity, even if they are better at promoting their ideas and agendas publicly. I'm not here to defend Christianity, however. I've been asked to be here as a biblical scholar. So here's my response to the prompt. When we talk about worldviews, what I take us to mean is the set of beliefs that a person or group of people holds about the way the world works. So, does Christianity lead a person to having a logical, or if I may, reasonable view on how the world works? I would say no, it does not. But why? Primarily because I think science does a much better job of explaining or helping us understand the world around us than the explanations for how life works as contained in the Christian Bible or the doctrines of the church. But more specifically, as to why Christianity itself is unhelpful to these ends, let me direct us to what we find in Christian scriptures, the primary source for Christian belief for most today. In other words, if we want to talk about Christianity as a worldview, even though I've already established there's many Christianities and multiple worldviews, then I want us to be quite honest about what the sources of Christian thought and belief do encourage people to believe, regardless of the extent to which any given Christian is aware of those sources. So, first, the God who is described in Christian scriptures and the doctrines of the church often does not line up with what we know about how the world works. So, for instance, we don't actually get to say the right things to God and get the response that we want. It doesn't work that way. In spite of claims countless men have made over the centuries, I really do not think that God sits in heaven watching our every move and tweaking with every detail of our lives. And if there is a cosmic God, I am certain that he, she, it, they does not have a favorite group of people. Secondly, many of the beliefs central to the Christian Bible are harmful for people, thus are not sustainable as the norm for all of humanity. I could say more, but these two issues are the most important to me in terms of why Christianity as a worldview is not the best option for us today. I want to say a little bit more about those two claims I just made. On the issue of the God described in the Christian Bible, most people who grow up in a Christian home or attending a Christian church are taught that God is in control of all things, usually in control of every little thing. This belief is well backed by biblical themes and passages. In other words, according to the Christian Bible, it is quite appropriate to believe that God is in control of every part of a person's life. There are two main concerns that this initial framework raises for me. The first is that if you believe that God is in control of every detail of your life and things are going badly, the scriptures repeatedly tell you it is due to one of two things. Either you have offended God and you must make reparations, repair that relationship so that God will begin to bless you, or God is testing you. It took me quite a long time to separate myself from this way of viewing the world, but I have joined the millions before me who reject the belief that God causes or allows harm to befall people just because they have offended him. Boiled down, this belief actually prepares people to accept abuse from those they are in relationships with, whether from a partner or spouse, or even within various institutions, including the church itself. Similarly, given the kinds of suffering we're talking about in the world, to say that God inflicts or allows it just to test your faith is to say that God is an abusive being. I encourage people to cease and desist from worshiping such a God. The second concern that I have when people fervently believe, as I once did, that God is in control of every little thing, is that they are less likely to be actively working to address the problems in this world and are more likely to be praying about it, asking God to fix it all. My time as an evangelist tells me that there are millions of people praying to God every morning to direct life or even world events through the means of the spiritual realm. This is why so many conservative Christians think of themselves as being apolitical, that politics just don't matter to them. But as so many developments as of late in this country ought to make much more clear for such people, the political is entirely personal, or people wouldn't be upset about major decisions happening in politics. Believing that God is in control of every little detail makes people passive. It is disempowering, and it makes people averse to addressing head on the problems in the world that we so badly need to be actively addressing. As for that second claim, that there are many beliefs in the Christian Bible that are harmful to people, I've spent 20 years trying to help people see the many layers, right? So let me just skip, I can't address all of it, and I chatted more at the front than I meant to. So let me just say, I like to, my scholarship, the work I do helps people see or invites people to see the way biblical texts, if read uncritically, so reading with the grain of them, can lead to people thinking of women as second-class citizens. It teaches people to have an us against them mentality, which teaches people to see others as opponents, which doesn't play well long term. Both testaments of the Christian Bible at times endorse the belief that spilling blood appeases God's anger. And most important in our context, actually, is that the Gospel of John, most Christians' favorite, and Paul's letters teach people that what matters most in this world is having the right beliefs about salvation. Okay, so I'm going to skip some of that too. The thing is, in my reading of Paul and Jesus, they were doing two separate things. Jesus, if we want to posit one single person, we mean by this designation, being the good Jew that he was, stood up for people. He told parables that highlighted the social injustices that his own religious leaders were complicit with, and he was executed for speaking truth to power. From this perspective, he was standing in the tradition of the Hebrew Bible prophets, calling out economic exploitation and its justification by the religious establishment. This is the form of Christianity that most of my friends identify with. The guy that Christians claim to be worshiping was killed for caring about the mistreatment of people at the hands of those in power. But most Christians who want to assert that this country needs so-called Christian values tend to be focused on a handful of political issues and stand on the side of them that end up harming millions of people. They are embodying the very form of religiosity that Jesus was angered by, in my way of reading him. This is the form of Christianity that comes from taking Paul and his legalistic letters quite seriously, it seems to me. So from my perspective, this isn't the reason Christianity is being picked on tonight. Is because of the way so many Christians choose to engage the Bible and wield the power and authority that they ascribe to it. So are people making the words on the pages of the Bible their first priority to uphold? Or are they making their first priority that of seeking to love and understand others, regardless of the way those others live?
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. All right. We are going to rebuttals, 6 minutes. Selah, you're going to have, let me get my thingy here, right? Appreciate everybody in the chat. Hit the like button. Super chat your questions for Q&A when we get there. And Selah, go ahead and start your timer.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and begin then. So first off, it was brought up this idea that I'm not a fan of proofreading. And I agree that we need to read the scriptures through in a well way. But when we looked over today's speech and the speech I gave, I presented one verse. I do agree with that. But the majority of my quotes were either from Aristotle, the Roman state, and evidence we see from even going back to this idea and goal too of eugenics and looking at how sacred life truly is. Now, it was next brought up what lens we use for scripture, and this idea that Christianity has lots of different lenses or different views, I guess you would have to say. Now, my main response to this is we can go ahead as main idea. Now, at the hand of Christianity, I completely agree that some people have different beliefs when it comes to Christianity. Some people, if we're going to use the topics such as tongues, some people believe in praying in tongues, some people don't believe it actually is. But we do have a main idea that Jesus came and died on a cross to save us from our sins. And we believe the scriptures to be true. So if I were to go to heaven today and God told me, well, no, your belief regarding tongues wasn't necessarily true. Like it wasn't right there. That's fine by me. I'm perfectly okay with that. But the whole point of even going to heaven was because I had the main idea at hand of salvation, which we'll talk about a little bit later too. Now, it was next talked about how many Christians, even the idea of pro-life. And I think I did have the chance to read your article on HuffPost regarding pro-life and what it truly means as according to you. Now, my main response to this is personal peace. Now, I don't know about you, but almost every single person I've ever met has had some type of hardship in their life. I don't meet that many privileged people who have never gone through something hard whatsoever, never had a trial in their life. Now, I think this is the idea where pro-life comes in. We believe that life is sacred, but we're not saying that all throughout your life, you're never going to have a hardship. In fact, Simone Biles, the famed gymnast, she and her sister were adopted out of the foster care system. Carlos Barrera, a boxer, he was the first generation America. I can go down a list of just Olympic athletes who experienced hardships, but they still chose some idea that they're alive today and that life is sacred. And that's where the real idea comes in. Even if we look at the topic of death penalty, we have the idea that even if it's a death penalty, I agree that life completely is sacred. Now, for me personally, I don't agree with the death penalty. I've spent a year learning about federal prison, but what I do agree with, and what I know the Bible does too, is that life is sacred. So any type of death, whether accidental or purposeful, is important to God. Now, it was next talked about how we need to have a reasonable worldview and how Christianity was not a reasonable worldview, and really going to this idea of science. Now, my main response to this is realistic, not reasonable. Realistic, not reasonable. And the way I say this too, I mean, Christianity isn't that reasonable. A loving God who sent his son to die for people who couldn't give anything back to God, no, that's not reasonable when we look at it from our merit-based society, the way we view the world. But it is a realistic view of the world. Even throughout my speech earlier, I talked about how even in science, we were able to increase that because we saw the world as something good, as something that God made. We saw life as sacred. We saw that there is subjective, not subjective, but objective morals at hand and ethics. So I agree, that kind of love isn't reasonable, but it is a realistic look at how the world is. And it is a better option because it is realistic and we can make policies off of that. It was next talked about this idea that we can't pray to God and expect something in return, kind of like we're trying to trick God into doing what we want. Now, I know that's a lot what maybe Joel Osteen might say, or that there might be a favorite group according to God. But according to the scriptures I read, God loves all people. I mean, John 3:16, the Bible verse that many Christians know and repeat, is because that God loved all people and gave his son up for that. And pro-life even goes more into that, fighting racism. I have statistics I could bring up later about how African-American women or African-American children are aborted 5 times more than Caucasian. So we have this idea that pro-life even goes into this idea of fighting racism. It was next talked about these 2 ideas, that God is in control. So we either offended God or God is testing us. Now, my main response to this is the Garden of Eden. Now, we know in the Garden of Eden, we had this idea of free will. If God wanted us to love him, we would be robots of just talking robots who are programmed to love him, but we simply were not. He gave us the free will. We ended up choosing disobedience, which brought about, because God is one of justice and morals, of death. So we do have evil, horrendous evil in this world that is absolutely even horrible to talk about. But it is the truth, because we live in a free will society where our choices do have consequences. But therefore, we have a God, though, who works through that pain for a purpose. And he calls us to something even better after death, too. It was next talked about how women are second class. I mean, Jesus made it very clear that he did love women, even showing up at the tomb. In salvation, Roman Greek changed from 30 million people changing to the Christian worldview. And we see that instead of going with the worldview of the pagan society that they had. So we see this idea that Christianity is something more logical, not just logical, but better for modern society and any society at whole. Thank you.
I really appreciate that. Thank you, Selah. You had 30 seconds left, but no biggie. We'll let Dr. Bird go ahead, and I am backing out. 6 minutes, Dr. Bird. Let me get that thing started here. Okay.
There were so many things that you brought up in your opening statement that I was intrigued by, and I'm actually not going to go point by point. But what I would like to say is I believe everyone that you quoted was male, besides Margaret Sanger. And you quoted men from the Greek and Roman world, because primarily men are what we read from any point in history. But just because a man from the 4th century BCE or the 4th century Common Era says that abortion is a crime against the father does not mean that he's right. And multiple men over the centuries saying that abortion is a crime, just because many of them say it over and over again, does not actually mean that they're right. There is not a single person that I know who would say that the cells aren't alive, because they are. It's part of biology, right? Things are living. And as soon as that thing starts multiplying, it's living. So the question in my mind is never about whether life is sacred. The question is not about whether life is sacred. The question is about what you are putting first. And the question from my perspective, and this was the thing that when I was in college and I was required to take a philosophy course, and I'm really glad that I was, and I was absolutely anti-abortion, right? And that was one of the topics we were asked to read about and listen to and think about and just give an honest hearing to the other side. And I was really uncomfortable with it. And I still didn't agree with them, but I heard something there that I hadn't heard before. And so from my perspective, when I hear people trying to find ways to get the conversation about abortion, about how to handle an unplanned pregnancy, when people put the fetus first, what people are saying, intentionally or not, is that women are actually primarily baby makers. If what can transpire within a woman's uterus, right, must be allowed to go through to its final conclusion, and presumably a viable human. When that is put first, or even on equal footing with the woman, not the mother yet, because she hasn't pushed, or the person hasn't pushed the baby out yet, the woman, right? When you put the fetus on equal plane with the woman, even, you are saying that part of a woman's body, that element that many women, but not all, are able to do, that is actually, that's her primary purpose. So this whole conversation about abortion is not, in my opinion, about the fetuses, but that is where the conversation in the public discourse primarily resides. The point from my perspective is the woman or the person who is pregnant. What is going on in their life? Are they able to support a child should they bring it into the world? Are they going to be able to be loving and supportive? Are they going to be able to feed, house, give healthcare? When people say, well, then put a child up for adoption, people that do that are not taking into consideration the emotional impact that this usually, though not always, has on a woman who is forced to carry to term and then give up for adoption. I would recommend the book Where the Girls Went. Oh shoot, I should come up with the title again. It's talking about what happened, all these women and the emotional trauma they have lived with their entire lives because they were forced to carry to term and give up for adoption. The conversation about abortion, from my perspective, is that the fetuses are put first and people are not taking seriously the life that the woman or the person who's pregnant is actually living. People are not taking seriously that there are what is it? At least 50% of abortions are performed on women who are already mothers. Like they already have families and they can't provide any further. They can't do any more. There are so many things that you threw out there that, again, are just that felt very simplistic. I have several chapters in my book in Permission Granted, trying to help people look at the chapters 2 and 3 of Genesis with an open mind, because the words that I heard you share, Selah, were about free will and disobedience. And those are actually taught to us by Paul and by Augustine. That's not actually in the story. The story isn't actually about free will, but Augustine said that it was, and we carry a burden, I think, because of Augustine. I think I was taught by rabbis to see the story in Genesis 3 as enlightenment and a step up for humankind. So there are so many pieces that we could discuss, I think. But I need to be quiet because my time is up.
I love how you get the cue, right? Everybody gets the cue. When I appear, the party stops. I'm the party pooper. All right. So now we're going to the 1 hour open back and forth. I didn't want to time anything here other than giving us 1 hour. I will only interject if I feel like one side is kind of dominating in terms of like, hey, Selah, we got to hear what you have to say here. Or Dr. Bird, we need to hear what you have to say. So both of you don't have to mute. And I will be backing out. We'll have it the same setup, and party's starting now without me.
Okay. I do have a question. I'm looking at my notes that I took that I didn't get to respond to. I have a question for you. And I might not be quoting you accurately, so feel free to correct me, but I'm just trying to get the sense of what you were saying. You said something to the effect of, without God, all things are permitted and the world would just fall apart. Can you explain why you think that is true?
Sure. So actually that main quote is from Richard Dawkins. He said, if I were to quote that small portion of it, quote, "The universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose."
No. I'm so sorry. This is from an earlier part. That's not. Okay. It wasn't from the Dawkins quote. Okay. You were saying that without God, things would people would do whatever they feel like doing. You were making the statement that we
Sure.
essentially that we need God in order to be ethical beings.
Oh, yes, for sure. So
Why can you explain why you think that is true?
Sure. So that all really does stem to why I did quote Richard Dawkins at the end of that speech. Because if we don't have a design or a creator who says what our purpose is or our value for our life, then all things would be ethical and per se, or nothing would be ethical of being able to say that without some type of outside moral code. Since I could determine for myself what my moral code is or what my right and wrong is, might be very different than what your right and wrong is, because we don't have an outside moral code telling us what is right and what is wrong, and depending on that type of law. And so we've allowed for that to be taken out. So God's taken out, then no standards of moral code is taken out, then everything becomes permissible. So that's why we even see in abortion today, 90% of children with Down syndrome are aborted, because we don't have this idea of sacred life or that killing is wrong. It's become more of an idea of personal peace at best.
All due respect, I think you misunderstood the quote by Dawkins that you shared, because what he was saying is he was talking about what he has observed in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
He was not saying that without God, people are unethical. He was talking about the randomness of the world, and that things like the Holocaust, it's awful to even do that, but I'm trying to think of, a thing.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a God that's watching over people or cares or all these different, right? If there's a thing about justice and morality, no, that thing doesn't happen. Okay. He wasn't talking about without God, we fall apart. I'm a little bit frustrated that you've misunderstood him, because it threw our conversation off here. He was simply observing the world and the way things just happen sometimes. Awful things happen. Things happen that are not in keeping with what would be beneficial for the world, but things fall apart, blah, blah, blah. When I have students that tell me, or when I interact with people who tell me that they really do think that if it weren't for God, there would be no morality, I remember believing that. I really do. I remember very, very staunchly believing that. And I think it's an understandable belief to have when you grow up in a church and when you grow up in a Christian home. But it's also, I don't know, Selah, if you could even consider this, but it is also exquisitely arrogant. It is arrogant to say that you have to know the God that you worship in order to be a good human being. It's also offensive, really. But some of the most humane, ethical, loving people I know are atheists, or don't even want a label. They are moral and ethical because living that way is what makes them happy. Living that way is what makes the most sense to them. Living that way has nothing to do with a God who exists, has nothing to do with keeping that God happy, has nothing to do with the belief that this is the moral code that some outside source has imposed on us. I don't know if you've ever considered the outside of your comment. If you've ever tried to put yourself in the shoes of someone who doesn't believe that the God you love and worship exists, right? And how that sounds when you say that to them.
Oh, sure. And I apologize if I made you uncomfortable whatsoever.
You didn't make me uncomfortable.
Okay.
I'm trying to point something out to you.
Okay, sure. So when I was even looking at that Richard Dawkins quote while you're talking about it, he was really going off this idea that he believes in a Darwinian worldview. So in other words, a worldview without God. And so he says by our selfish genes, whatever does come is permissible. So some people are lucky, some people get hurt. So in other words, we don't even have a standard, if I were to understand it correctly. I don't know how you would determine it, but a standard of what is good and what is bad. And nowhere do I claim to be a good person. When I look at, whatever humanity has come to, even our modern day America, if we were on the news today, we see a lot more death and horror and evil. And the way I do determine it is because I know what is good, that life is good, that love is good. And then I know what is evil, that any type of acts of hate, racism, whatever might be, killing, murder, are evil. And so we were to look at it, we're not claiming to say that everybody can be a good human. And I agree completely that some people who are not Christians can have good ethical lives. But even if we were to go back to the speech I gave earlier regarding the Rome and Greek and what was brought up there, we see these people turning over from their pagan worldviews, from a lot of sin that was going on in their lives, and lots of killing, emphasized killing the children, especially girls, after they were born, so that way the men could rule supreme. And they said, this isn't a good idea. The Christians are saying that we should open up orphanages for these children who are being thrown out for the crows. They're saying that women do have a place in society. And they ended up changing to that worldview of taking away their pagan ideologies and moving towards Christianity. And I think it's because we realize that Christianity has provided a great moral code that none of us can determine. So even if I were to say I'm a great person or I'm a good person, my definition of good might include being racist, while someone else's determination of good might be different. So we have to have some type of outside look, not majority rules, but an outside look at a moral code of determining what is good and what is bad and what objective thing there is for it.
I don't think we're going to get any farther on that because we're talking I think we're not hearing each other.
Okay.
I wanted to turn to John 3:16 because, is that okay if we do that?
Sure.
Because you referenced it, and it's one of those passages that I just wish we could pull out of. We could just erase, because when I read this section of John chapter 3, I read the whole, like I keep going, right? So if I'm reading a translation, it's probably different from what you read, but I read the NRSV. So bear with me if the wording is different. But, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son so that everyone who believes in him may not perish, but may have eternal life. Indeed, God did not send the son into the world to condemn the world. It sounds so good so far, right? But in order that the world might be saved through him. Those who believe in him are not condemned, but those who do not believe are condemned already.
You want me to respond to that, or?
Nope, I'm just pausing for effect.
Okay.
Those who do not believe are condemned already because they have not believed in the only Son of God. And this is the judgment, that the light has come into the world and people loved darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. There are so many pieces of this passage. I really just want to say, I don't agree with that. I don't agree that people love darkness rather than light, but John says it. And so people believe that it's true. For all who do evil hate the light and do not come to the light, blah, blah, blah. But those who do what is true, blah, blah, blah. And then the end of the verse, the end of the chapter talks about the Father loves the Son and has placed all things in his hands. Whoever believes in the Son has eternal life. Whoever disobeys the Son will not see life, but must endure God's wrath. That is not a God who loves everyone. If God is willing to unleash his wrath on some of us. What do you think about that?
Sure. So it all goes back to the Garden of Eden. When we have that free will, and if you do not agree with the Garden of Eden, we can go ahead.
No. I'm just asking about a God who would unleash his wrath on people.
Okay.
How you square that
as being good, a good God,
as God loving all people. Yeah.
Yes. Well, here's the thing. God gave us a choice of choosing salvation and choosing life, or choosing to remain where we are. I don't know about you, but when I come to something, my first instinct probably isn't to do what under Christian law is guaranteed as good. If a test is really hard for me, I don't think I'm gonna be like, oh, I'm gonna study for it. It might be instead, well, cheating seems like the easier option for me at hand. So we do have this difference of being able to say what's good and bad, but human nature is sinful by birth. We are inclined to do something more evil than it's not. And that's what we see from even civilizations or societies that are moving away from Christianity. I know in Iceland, we've almost eradicated Down syndrome. If we were to go a bit further in the UK, we now have these assisted deaths or assisted suicides for anybody who has mental illnesses whatsoever. So if you're lonely, you can be killed by a doctor lawfully and medically. So then we have to come to the idea that God is a just God, though. He's not one that allows everything permissible, because if we allow everything permissible, then we would allow sin altogether. So he has to have the stance of choosing, of being a good God, and thus a God that demands justice. That's why racism is wrong. As a fellow Mexican, or as a Mexican myself, I believe that racism, and seen it before, that is inherently wrong and evil.
You aren't answering my question, is the thing. You really aren't. I'm sorry for interrupting, but you're not answering my question. You're just not
answering the question of why God has to have wrath, because he's a just God. And
I'm actually just asking you really to think about whether or not you actually agree with what you're saying, that God would unleash his wrath, that is a loving thing to do, unleash his wrath. Mm-hmm. Here's the thing, Selah, you don't have to actually agree with scripture. You are allowed to think about the implications of what's being said in scripture and consider for yourself whether you actually want that for yourself and for the way you think about the world. I almost started crying because I just haven't had someone say this stuff to me in a long time. You actually believe that we're more inclined to sin. I mean, honestly, Selah, that makes me so sad. I am not more inclined to sin. I am actually much more inclined to goodness and good and doing right than I am to sin. There are times I am tempted. Yes. There are times I have issues. Yes. But the belief that every single human is born with original sin is something that a handful of men read into Genesis 3. And Christians have been taught it so well that most cannot imagine not believing in original sin. But what that does, when you start there, you start with the premise that humans are originally sinful. The way that affects the way you think about people, the way you talk to people, it's actually really harmful. If I cared about what you think, I would be offended that you made the blanket statement that people are inclined to sin, that you're asserting here in this conversation your truth as if it's a blanket truth for all humans. And it isn't a blanket truth for all humans. But you do believe that, and I understand that. But I'm not interested in debating. I'm interested in a conversation, and I'm interested in whether or not you've actually considered that is not the only way to look at humanity. What does it flip on its head if you say that humans, if you agree with Genesis 1, that humans are good? God created humans, and God saw that was really good, and humans are good. Or if you see in the third creation story in Proverbs chapter 8, where wisdom is there at God's side and helping God create everything, and that humanity was delightful, and God delighted in humans. And what if you didn't read Genesis 2 and 3 through the lens of original sin? Have you, just out of curiosity, we're not debating here. I'm not asking you to defend something. I'm genuinely curious if you've ever looked at Genesis 3, not through the lens of original sin.
I've looked at Genesis 3, and then I looked through the rest of the Bible and throughout history.
No. I'm asking about Genesis 3, sweet thing.
Okay. All right. Well, Genesis 3, I mean, I've seen it pretty clear.
No, I asked if you've ever looked at it without looking at it through the lens of original sin. Just a pure question. Have you ever done that? Have you ever read?
I would say yes.
Without
assuming worldview.
Without assuming that Genesis 3 is about original sin, you've looked at Genesis 3 that way?
I mean, ever since I was little, I've read the Bible. So the first time reading it, you're not going to read it through an idea of going through the rest of the book. So yes, when I read it first, it made the story clear to me.
Yeah, we're still not talking on the same length here, same wavelength. That's okay. Do you have a question for me? Maybe we should do that.
That's what I was just about to peek in and do.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. So given that the Christian church didn't have state power until Constantine's settlement,
Hold on.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. Could you say that again?
Oh, yes, for sure. So given that the Christian church did not have state power or any type of influence until the Constantine settlement, what best explains why the objective observation that the Greek and Roman elite or the learned class converted over to the Christian worldview from the Hellenistic philosophy, unless it was a logical worldview for society?
I get tripped up when I don't agree with the premise that someone starts with.
Okay, so let's take out that first premise then, that the Christian church didn't have state power. Okay.
Yeah. So part of my response is not to address your specific question, because I want to address where we don't see things the same. So for instance, I want to ask you, or to put out there, like, are you aware of, the ideas that the Christian church came to embrace are predominantly from Paul's letters. And, and it's about this, how you make sense of salvation, how you make sense of a person's execution and resurrection in giving you salvation. And what Paul did there in the 5 or 6 different models of salvation that he talks about, he pulled from Greco-Roman ideas. So he pulled from ideas that were out there in the world that others, the people in the Greco-Roman world, would already identify with. It made it easy to get on board with. If you look at, the worship practices and the ideas and the beliefs associated with a goddess, the worship of the goddess Isis, not to be confused with a political, a group today, and also Sybil in Asia Minor. When you look at those practices and those ideas and those beliefs, you can see why Paul would use some of those, right, to talk about Jesus. Okay. But when you ask why would Greeks and Romans, convert to this world, to this religious tradition, if it didn't make sense? And I think that there's more to it than just that. I think it takes looking at the development of the ideas around Jesus, and then the ideas around what becomes the church. Because when I referenced very briefly in my opening comment, I was talking about the difference between the life that Jesus lived, that also got him killed, and what Paul did with ideas related to Jesus's death. Those are two different things, right? Jesus was living a life of standing for justice for people. And Paul doesn't reference anything about Jesus's life, but talks about Jesus's death and works there, right? And so the thing about this is it does make it applicable to everyone. People in power can get on board with these ideas. It puts it into, I talk about it usually in terms of, it puts it into a spiritual realm, so that you can be wealthy and still embrace this worldview. You're not offended by what Jesus's words are, because you're not focusing on Jesus' words that denounce economic exploitation. You can get on board with a spiritualized message of Jesus died for you, and this is the way that he gives you salvation. So, it's a unifying kind of an idea in the 1st century and early 2nd century. Yeah, that people can get on board with that. When Constantine came along and said, all right, you guys, you're about to split my empire because you're disagreeing about this guy, Jesus, that you worship. Let's get together and decide what you actually believe about this man, so that my empire doesn't split. It was entirely driven by politics and power to do that kind of a thing.
Real quick, if I may, I just want to let you know, Selah, please feel comfortable interjecting, because Dr. Bird is exciting, and she would not be obviously disrespected. I'm saying to allow yourself to do that, because I don't want to feel like I need to jump in. If there is something you feel like you want to press, feel free to press.
Thank you.
That's, but you're having a conversation. So I just want to let you know that. That way I don't have to work too hard, if that makes sense.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, so to hop in here real quick, Dr.
Yeah,
Bird.
please.
Yes, so when we're talking about it, I don't think so the answer to your question, if I'm understanding, or answer to my question, if I'm understanding correctly, is because the Christian worldview was more unifying. We had a more unified culture with Christianity.
The beliefs that Paul pulled together did appeal to more people. Yeah, because he pulled from Greek and Roman religious traditions and their ideas that already existed. So the origins of Christian theology are actually pagan. And I actually think that's important to note, given the several times you referred to pagan ideas in a negative way in your opening, that Christian theology was actually primarily pagan, and then becomes Christian because of the tradition. So
okay, so to hop in there on the whole idea that pagan is wrong. So infanticide of killing innocent infants or throwing out mainly baby girls out to the crows, that's okay? Or what's your thoughts about that?
No, that isn't. But I'm trying to talk about a much larger picture than just the way a group of people handled killing baby girls. We have had people in the last century doing the same thing because of population issues and the way they chose to handle it. I'm not a fan of infanticide. Not my intention. What I think is important to raise is when you do raise some important points, right? That this idea of death exposure, right, of infants that people don't want to care for, right? That's horrific. And yet it is a thing that some societies or some groups of people actually have to do because they don't have the means to care for certain people. I'm not trying to say it's right or wrong. I'm trying to say that in this conversation, you have chosen some very specific points, and I'm interested in a bigger picture, which is that you have sided with a patriarchal worldview, for instance, that does promote procreativeness. And the reasons that Augustus promoted procreation was because he needed a military and he wanted to be a ruler of a large empire. And so of course he gave a tax break to people who had more children. Like, of course he's going to do that. But that's driven by something other than just loving life or thinking that life is sacred. I just think it's really interesting. So you've referenced several times this idea that the biblical worldview is that all lives matter, but I don't think that's actually true. I find that to be a very selective reading. Even the fact that you have referred to, again, like the love and charity of human life, love and charity, even just that John 3 passage says that God is going to love those who love him, and God is going to be angry at those who do not. That is what John 3 says. I'm not okay with that. I'm not okay telling my children or my friends' children that it's okay to be angry at people who don't agree with you, who don't like you, who don't have the same beliefs as you. But that's what this is saying, that God's wrath. So your facial expressions are telling me that you think I'm what?
I'm trying to understand. So no, I'm trying to understand where the beliefs are going, because I mean, under this debate too, we're talking about, is Christianity the more logical worldview in respects to abortion? So if we can talk about my own salvation all day long, or we can talk about society in general too.
Nobody said anything to me about, is Christianity the logical worldview in relation to abortion?
Not in relation, but I know it's part of today's talk.
The premise is whether it's a logical worldview. And you chose to focus in on abortion, and I can go there. But that isn't the only thing we're talking about, because for me to talk about it, I have to put it in the larger context of what Christian scriptures do say. And for me, if you want to talk, the thing is, the Christian scriptures consistently teach people that women really are baby makers, even though there are other threads in there about women, strong women leaders. There are. But there are more and extended stories about women, because of the context, because of the time, because of, all the different reasons that ancient context-wise demand. But we see women really upset when they're not able to provide children for their family. Women who talk about life as if they have no meaning, as if they are despised until they bring children into the world. And the thing is, I think that that's a legitimate representation of the way things were at the time. I'm not trying to criticize an ancient worldview and an ancient culture. I'm trying to say that people who grow up on these stories or are influenced by a range of passages in the Christian Bible will get the message that women are primarily baby makers. That's one of the predominant messages you'll get from the Hebrew Bible about women. I don't think that that's the same thing as saying that all life is sacred. I don't think that's as empowering for women as you seem to think.
So I'm so sorry. I think you froze. Oh, sorry. No, thought my computer froze up. So when we're talking about that, then why do you think mainly girls or women were more aborted in China than males?
Oh, because of patriarchy and because of the preference for male and the valuing of maleness over femaleness, or the valuing of male humans as more important. They are more, all the various parts of patriarchal ideas and societies that go hand in hand with that choice and that preference in the Rome, the first century or the 19th,
Sure.
the 20th century, right?
Sure.
I don't,
So China isn't a Christian worldview, though. They're not a Christian society, right?
I'm not sure what your point is with that.
So we can agree that from the evidence that I brought up regarding what was said during the early Roman and Greek empires, and even what the British Reporter said in 2008, so the 21st century, that it's Christianity that's helping out with the charities or orphanages, or even orphanages for those girls and women who would have been later aborted or killed, correct?
I don't know about what services people are providing for women, for children who would have been aborted. I know that there are a lot of orphanages in this world. I know there are a lot of children who do not have homes. And that, in my opinion, actually backs up the larger premise that I think is important about the conversation of terminating unplanned pregnancies. When there are so many children who are not being cared for already, why is it important to force a person to bring another one into the world if the pregnant person can't care for them?
Okay.
Like, why is that more important? Forcing a pregnant person to carry to term, why is that more important than looking at the picture and saying, oh my gosh, I'm just going to say, this person is in a place in their life where she can't bring to term because her work right now is too overwhelming for her. She is not going to be able to gestate. So she's going to terminate this pregnancy. Why is that wrong?
Sure. So if I were to answer back with a question, then should every child in the orphan care or into foster care be killed, or should every prisoner be?
That's not an equal response. I'm asking you why.
Not?
No, it isn't, because if the day that I decided that I was not going to be able to carry to term the pregnancy in my uterus, it was because there was no way I was going to be able to gestate, to handle gestation at that point in my life, regardless of whether I was going to be prepared emotionally to give up for adoption or not. It didn't matter. I wasn't going to be able to get to the point of delivering. So I terminated a very unplanned and very surprising pregnancy. Why is that, in light of knowing there are so many children? Like, I feel like there's this human element that you're missing.
Of personal peace and happiness?
No, not personal peace. It's not personal peace and happiness. That feels stunningly narrow focused.
So what would be your goal then? So what's the value of life?
I actually just described to you that I was not going to be physically able.
Okay, so we're talking about the physically able then, not the emotionally.
No, Okay. I'm talking about the fact that I wasn't going to be physically able to both carry a child to term and do the job I was supposed to do that year. I wasn't going to be able to do both. And also I didn't have the resources or the means to care for a child. Had I been able to carry that child to gestation. So any piece of this picture wasn't going to work for me. I was not able to do that. Gestate, give up for adoption, none of it. So I terminated. That was one of the easiest decisions of my life, actually. Was not a hard decision because I had it, because of what was going on in my life. And I feel like you're going to turn it around to something about life being sacred. I'm not questioning whether life is sacred. I'm questioning whether you're taking seriously the women's lives, the people's lives who are faced with this situation. And in my case, I had gone to 9 years of graduate school, and I had a job that I wanted that reflected, was going to allow me to apply those 9 years of graduate school. I was not going to give up the job so that I could carry and go live with my parents at home. Like I wasn't, there was no part of that was going to work for me. And the, prophylactic didn't work. So I was there in that situation. And okay. I feel like, okay, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, sorry. No, well, first off, I know that you have an amazing career and lots of amazing degrees that it's a lot of hard work that was put on your part. And I have complete respect for that. Now, when you talked a little bit about how sacred of life and whether or not we should determine that or not, I think we could both agree, just wanted to get a yes or no of that life begins at conception, what the 95%?
You're not hearing what I'm saying if you're asking me that.
No, I just wanted to make it clear before I move on to.
I said it 30 minutes ago.
Okay, so I just want to make it clear. Okay. So we both.
I already said it, and it's offensive that you are saying it that way. Yes. There's nothing about life. There's nothing about an egg and being fertilized that isn't living. Go ahead.
Nothing. Okay. Well, first off, I apologize if I offended you or disrespected you whatsoever. That was not my intentions. And so second off, for when we're looking down the road, if we were just to place it in a different environment, so let's say there's a 20-year-old or a 17-year-old mom who was living on government assistance. Her family told her to abort the child. She simply did not have the means to care for her child. So her family and friends were encouraging her to abort the child. It was just out of the kindness and love that they had for her. They wanted something that was better for her. But let's say she chose to carry the child through. And yes, she did have to struggle during the beginning years, especially. Is that life any more or any less valuable because of the mother's financial security or because of where she was at her point in her life?
I'm not even sure what you're asking me. The scenario you set up doesn't match in my mind, the question you're asking. Are you saying that I don't even know? I honestly, could you try that again, please? I'm not trying to be dismissive or rude. I genuinely don't know why the setup you shared is relevant to the question you asked.
Sure. So if we were to do a simpler setup, then if we were to say that there's a mom who found out she was pregnant.
She's already a mother, so she already has a child?
She found out she was pregnant.
So she's a woman who found out she's pregnant. That she's not a mother yet. Okay. So a young woman finds out she's pregnant. A young
woman who has a pregnancy, and she is told by family and friends that she should have an abortion because she's living on government assistance. She does not have a stable boyfriend or husband to come in and help. And on top of that, she still has the rest of her life ahead of her. She's 17 years old. And let's say that she ended up having the child and, as you say, become a mother. Is that child any more or any less valuable because of his mom's financial options at that
not
point?
At all. That has nothing to do with the child's value.
All right, so I'm glad we agree on that.
The child is loved and very much wanted in that situation, that she wanted to bring it to term. She wanted that child. And that is a beautiful thing. And she's going to struggle and she's going to be happy with her choices, I'm sure. maybe she won't be, but she'll ultimately be, because children will do that for you, right? Children bring a lot of love, even if there's a lot of challenge. When we talk about the concept, the issue of abortion in light of people who are already viable, in light of children in the world, when you say this woman brought this child to term and you use that child to talk about whether or not abortion is appropriate, I find that to be misunderstanding the situation. When you refer to a human that is viable and is existing absolutely fine on their own outside their mother's uterus, that is not the time or place. That child is a child. That child is not a part of the conversation about abortion. No, because she made a choice, and that's lovely and beautiful. And I hope everyone around her steps up.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I know that scenario was taken from Justin Bieber. That was his mom that made that decision.
That's great.
And so if I would ask you, or you wanted to ask a question, I know I'm asking a couple, so if you would like to ask one.
I think that what I wonder is how you heard what I said about my story.
I heard that you were currently working, you had the job of your dreams that you've worked very hard for, and you found out that you were pregnant. It was not a wanted pregnancy, and because it wasn't wanted, the child, or if we were to go with your definitions, the embryo, the fetus, whatever you want to call it, the fetus, before they have value as life, because they are wanted or unwanted. So because the child was unwanted, he wasn't a child yet. And so you chose abortion.
That actually isn't true. That is not an accurate or a fair representation of what I was saying or what I think and believe.
Okay.
Your language of putting wanted and unwanted as equating with equating whether or not a person, in my case, a woman, is able to care for a child. I was not able. So I did not bring that child into the world. That, in my opinion, and in the opinion of countless Christians, was the responsible thing for me to do.
So is that why you think so many children, or 90% of children with Down syndrome, are aborted each year? No,
actually, I think that if a person is aware that they are not able to give the time and the things that
to take care of a child with Down syndrome,
potentially.
Okay.
I think that's part of it. I think there might also be there might be a lot of fear and a lot of misunderstanding of what the life of a Down syndrome person can be like. I think there's a lot of things going on there that are just that might be about a form of selfishness and fear and misunderstanding because of, I mean, I don't have people close to me, but I know people with Down syndrome children, right? And I know the joy and the love and the delight that they are and that they bring to their family, right? But here's the interesting thing, in my opinion. I love the author Jodi Picoult, because she's not a Christian, but she takes on really important topics and addresses them. She addresses them by doing a lot of research and so forth. And one of, was it My Sister's Keeper? It was one of the early ones, one of her early novels, where she addresses this beautiful, the issue is this beautiful child who has brittle bone syndrome. And, she's not going to live longer than 15 or something like that. But the thing that Picoult wrestles with throughout this novel is this issue. If the mother had known about this disease, this issue, she actually would have terminated. But having that conversation, now that she brought that child into the world and she absolutely loves that child, you can't have that conversation regarding a person that you brought into the world. You don't talk about that child and whether or not abortion is okay. You talk about a fetus that is not yet viable. That is different. That is utterly different.
Okay. And I just, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, so just so that way I'm understanding clearly. So the being viable is dependent on what stage of life you're at. So like if you're born in 15 years old, you have different value compared to your second week in the womb. I'm just trying to understand clearly.
What I'm disagreeing with you on is where you are putting the label value. There is life itself is a gift.
Mm-hmm.
No question.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? Your move to assign value to an 8-week-old fetus in contrast to a 30-week-old developing fetus. The value label that you are using is disingenuous for me. That is not that's not where I'm coming from. You are still putting the fetus first. You are still talking about the fetus. You are not respecting the humanity of the woman, in my case, or the person who is pregnant. Mm-hmm. You are saying that a collection of cells gets to have the same voice as a person who has a purpose in life, who is trying to fulfill their purpose in life, who has worked hard to get to fulfill their purpose in life. Okay. To say that a collection of cells this large gets to have equal footing with me is, I wonder if you can wrap your head around that is actually offensive. And because I exist, I have things to do. I am doing the things I'm trying to do. But for you to use the word value, it's like you're saying that I don't think that the thing is alive or something. Of course I know it's alive. Of course it is, because it's growing, right? It's there's the question when you use this language of value, it feels like you're challenging me in whether or not I have respect for life. But I do. I absolutely do. Mm-hmm. And so saying it's not about whether I value a 30-week-old fetus more than a 6-week-old fetus. It's that I don't value one more than the other. That feels like actually, and I know you don't mean it, but it feels like an offensive thing to say because I don't value one life more than another. I'm trying to talk about having a responsible way of handling a situation that millions of women face. 1 in 4 women in this country are going to terminate an unplanned pregnancy, and most of them will already be mothers or will become mothers later. That is a fact. This isn't the energy that's put into protecting a fetus could be directed toward protecting the children that already exist outside of uteruses. Wouldn't that be lovely if all of the energy about saying that a fetus has value, I don't doubt that or challenge that at all. But what if we took all of the focus and energy that is on making sure people don't terminate an unplanned pregnancy? What if we took that energy and directed it toward making sure all children have enough food to eat, making sure addressing the problems in the world that actually affect people's safety and fullness of life for those who already exist.
So whoever's outside of the womb gets to have that
God,
food.
No, you're not hearing what I'm saying. it feels like you're being deliberate there, but I don't think you are. I think you're just trying to reflect back what you're hearing me say.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm talking about people who are already living lives. They matter more to me in the grand scheme of things than a fetus does. And I don't understand why you don't agree with that.
Sure. So do you want me to answer?
I'd love to know why you don't agree with that.
Answer?
Why you want to put a fetus on equal ground with a 3-year-old.
All right. I will definitely do so. And I apologize ahead of time if you find it disrespectful or offending in any way. I truly do not mean to be. I wish this to be a good conversation between us both. But when I'm taking the response of why I say a fetus or a child who could live outside of the womb and talking about a 3-year-old, I put them on equal value because of what 95% of biologists say, that life begins at conception. So whenever life starts, I therefore put value on it. And it doesn't matter to me the race, the gender, the beliefs, what type of worship, whatever that means. I say that all life has value simply because they are alive. And so that's the same reason why I don't support killing people who have mental illnesses. We have 150,000 federal prisoners in our current system. Each one of them costs about $30,000 per prisoner. So we were to equate that idea that, well, whoever is going to cost me some idea of my money, my time, or my career, then we shouldn't do this. So we're paying taxes for these prisoners. So it would be, I guess, more ethical or more logical to just kill them all or deport them, when in reality, I believe that all life has value. So no matter what stage you're at, if I'm whatever age I might be, or compared to a 3-year-old, I'm not going to say that I have more value because I'm older than a 3-year-old, or different stages, or even what type of career I'm at currently, or what type of career somebody else is at. I say that all life has value regarding that.
I agree that all life has value. And I thought I had said that several times already. So, but I agree with you. All life has value. I want it just really clear, just one briefly. I'm sorry, Derek, but I just want to follow up with something you said, and you've said a couple of times, Selah, which is, I don't think that you're trying to offend me. I don't think that I do not believe that you are ever you have at all, at any point, said something to be offensive. I'm actually trying to be honest with you and reflect and letting you know that the naivete of some of your comments actually is offensive. I'm not taking it personally. I'm not offended. I'm letting you know that those comments are offensive because I don't think you've considered the viewpoints. I don't think you've actually considered what the implications and of what some of the things I'm saying. I'm not offended, and I don't think that you are trying to be.
I'm glad to know you're not offended. Yes, I'm sorry about that too. If anything came across.
No, I'm trying to clarify that. I'm trying to let you know that some of the things you say aren't very well informed or understood in terms of how they land with people. That's all.
Real quick, if I may, while we have 11 minutes left, is there any way we can ride this train out on Christianity itself off the abortion
I would prefer
topic?
that. I would really prefer that.
And yeah, let's go there. I'm backing out. 10 minutes left till Q&A. Get your super chats in if you have a question. And thank you so much for the debate so far.
Will do. Thank you.
You made a really, what I thought was a really, not necessarily passionate, because I've taken you to be very calm and very collected and very well spoken. And very clear in what you're trying to say. So, but I took part of what you were saying, going back to your response to me, talking about whether or not a Christian worldview is realistic or reasonable. And you said several times, I believe, that you think that it is a realistic view of the world to see the element of Christianity that you focused in on, which is the idea that God sent his son into the world to die for the world, to die for the sins of the world. And that if I understood you correctly, that you think that that is a realistic view of the world, even if but it is actually an unreason, maybe because it's such a gift. It's beyond actually potentially being reasonable, but it is your understanding of the world. And did I understand you correctly on that?
Yes, the unreasonableness of the gift, but realistic look when it comes to nature, God, morals, human. Yes.
Just that the gift of Christ as the sacrifice for our sins, it just goes beyond reasonable. And therefore, it is just this lovely gift. And I wonder if you've ever, I'm going to calm down a little bit. I wonder if you've ever stopped to consider, or maybe I should say reconsider, the idea that someone needs to die in order to appease God's anger at our sin. I'm wondering if you've ever stopped to reconsider that. This is a yes/no question. Have you ever? You've stopped to reconsider whether or not this idea makes sense?
When I was 13 years old, I had to go through a class that questioned what I believe. And just from my peers and friends and work, you get questioned a lot of, well, why do you believe that? Is that really true? And you have to go down that road yourself of discovering whether your faith is true or not, and the beliefs regarding the Bible is true or not.
Sure. Yeah, no, I get that. I'm just wondering, why does it make, what's the question I actually want to ask then? See, here's the thing. One of the things about a Christian worldview, in particular, the form of Christianity that does embrace what you've just said. And by the way, part of what I was trying to say earlier, at my opening was, not all Christians agree with that way of understanding Christianity. So what you have defined there, in terms of God being male, sending his son into the world to die for our sins, like in a substitutionary atonement kind of a thing. It is a fact that not all Christians agree with that. Okay. But I absolutely understand that you do, and that a lot of people do. I'm not trying to dismiss that belief. I'm trying to make a distinction here that is not the only way to define Christianity. But if we're going to define it that way, I find that concept to be utterly frightening. The idea that God, in God's majesty and all-knowingness, created humanity, and the only way God being upset at us being sinful can be appeased, the only way for God to ultimately be okay with us not being perfect is for someone to die.
Sure. So we can talk about this. We could talk about my individual salvation. We could talk about Jesus dying on the cross. And I think both of us are passionate about it, and have known, throughout lots of our lives regarding it. So we could talk about it for a while, or we can revert our attention back to, is Christianity the logical worldview? And so in my beliefs, it's the state saying, is Christianity a logical worldview? And being an individual counts as something different, a different aspect. So for the state, we look at it through the lens of freedom of religion, as what John Locke and even our founders of the U.S. Constitution talked about, having that. We saw this idea of no longer worshiping the emperor as God. We see something being placed upon Christianity, having charity and valuing the poor, and even Roman, Greek, and elite going back to that. So it depends on which way you want to go. If you want to go down this individual one, I can answer that question about Jesus having to die on the cross, or we can go back to the state and its Christianity logic worldview.
I think part of the reason I'm pushing back on your claim that is a realistic view of the world is if you as a person view the world that way, that for me, when we're talking about Christianity as a worldview, and that is central to your worldview, that's important to me. That matters to me, that you think that it is realistic to say that someone needed to die in order for me to be okay with God. that premise is then going to play out in lots of ways that you interact with the world moving forward in your life.
Okay, so we can do that. We can talk about my individual self, but thankfully this debate really, or not thankfully, but I want to go back to the topic of this debate, so that we revert back to
Let's do that then. Let's just do that then.
So it's not the quotes that are coming from me, it's quotes and evidence coming from the Rome in Greek, republics and societies.
Okay, you're not... I'm asking you to think about the implications of what you...
Okay.
Nope. Back to you.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, I believe, I grew up I love my parents very much, but if we were, when we're little, we want to touch the stove, when it's on, like there's no harm in doing that. But our parents will tell us you can't touch the stove. And we might have some type of, timeout or disobedience or go to your room if we try to disobey and touch the stove. It's not because my parents didn't love me or because they had this idea that, some type of consequence to what I was doing was wrong. It's just something that they're, really upset about. And they just want to do it because out of some type of hatred or anger. But it's instead out of love that they did that.
Of course.
Same exact thing for Jesus dying on the cross. Our sin requires death. And so
I hear you that you do believe that. And I'm just going to say I don't find that very realistic. And I find that to be actually quite unsettling to equate tough love or discipline with saying that someone has to die in order for God's anger to be assuaged. That to me is not realistic or kind or reasonable or even loving, to say that God is that way and behaves that way.
Sure. So let's move from that then, since it's pretty clear that both of us are different regarding that.
Why don't we?
And instead, let's go ahead and go over, the idea of, do you want to do freedom of religion as a starting point? We have 2 minutes, so whatever.
You do say whatever you want to say, Selah. I'm fine with whatever you want to say.
Sure. So under the Christian worldview, we allow this idea of freedom of religion. So anybody can believe whatever under their conscience. Now, behavior's different. If we see somebody out there committing homicide, we obviously have to put a stop to it. Usually we have a due process of laws, federal prison, whatever it might be. But we do come to this idea that when it comes to our conscience or how we believe and how we worship, all religion is allowed, as what we've seen throughout the Old Testament, of God appointing certain people, but not appointing them per se, but using them as leaders in order to allow this freedom of religion and freedom of worship.
I would love to have this conversation with you in about 20 years.
Oh, was America then?
What's that? What's that?
Was America? Is that what you're referring to? Or
I said I would love to have this conversation with you again in 20 years.
Oh.
When you just have a lot more life experience. And I know that sounds really condescending, and I didn't mean it to. You have a lot of the right things to say. You have a lot of the right things to say. But it doesn't sound to me like you've experienced a lot. When you say that we have the freedom of religion in this country, I'm not sure that that's true. We actually have "in God we trust" on our coinage. Over in courtrooms. How in the world is that freedom of religion if the things that hold our country together, or the spaces in which in which people's individual issues are supposed to be played out, have the honor God? Like there are too many pieces of that I think are just not. There's just a lot of life that doesn't match up with the ideal.
I really appreciate both of you. I'm glad that I was not in this debate, or any guy was in this debate. So I really appreciate you all, and thank you for the super chats, all the questions that have come in. We're going to start right into Q&A. So if anyone has a question, feel free to super chat your question. It helps keep the lights on here and keeps me doing what I'm doing. I appreciate both of our guests coming on today, presenting their positions. And so we'll do Q&A. I'll allow both sides to have like a 2-minute outro just to have their final say, and then we will wrap things up. Our first super chat is by Scott Dute. Thank you so much for the super chats. Before I download the audio version, was the book Professor Bird referred to The Girls Who Went Away by Ann Fessler?
I'm pretty sure, yeah. It should refer to life in pre-Roe v. Wade era in the subtitle. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for
Awesome.
that super
Thanks,
chat.
Scott.
Yeah, I am looking for the next one here. Scrolling down, please forgive me. There was a lot of chat. I had to slow down the chat because it was so...
That's a lot of comments.
It's kind of a hot topic, you know?
Kind of.
Kind of a big deal right now.
Yeah.
Jake K, I want to say thank you for the super sticker. Really appreciate the support. Apollos, Christian Apologetics, thank you for the super chat. A theodicy for God's wrath. Moral causality is different from actual causality. I can breathe out oxygen that Hitler breathes in and be guiltless. God can intend someone to choose good when he or she doesn't. Either one of you want to address it, you can.
I mean, I agree. God's sovereign over everything. And so when we come to that, God can intend someone to choose good. So when he or she doesn't. And so I think to a certain degree, I do agree with the point. But Dr. Bird, do you have something to say about it?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. My cat is trying to get my attention. And I'm trying to just listen. I'm sorry. I should probably mute myself maybe.
No, you're good. I didn't know if you wanted to address the super chat, Dr. Bird.
Oh, I do. I just didn't. I wasn't trying to cut off what Selah was trying to say. Did you finish what you wanted?
Oh, yes. Yeah, you can go ahead.
Oh, okay. So theodicy for God's wrath. So here's the thing. Theodicy isn't about God's wrath. So that's why I'm a little bit hung up on the prompt. And again, I'm not trying to be dismissive or anything like that. It's just that these things matter in terms of the specifics here. Moral causality is different from actual causality. If you're talking about one person picking up a gun and shooting another versus the earthquake caused a tree to fall on someone, those are different issues. And is God sovereign over the tree that fell on someone? And is God sovereign over the person who picked up a gun? I don't think God. I think one of the things that I think, I am interested in as a biblical scholar is encouraging people to think beyond the way God is described within the Christian scriptures. So the concept that God is actually sovereign over every little thing is what has led to all of these really complicated beliefs around free will and around something like a Hitler developing. Aside from the fact that the fascism within Germany and he were part of a lot of complexity. It wasn't like there was just one person, right? Okay, so we can set that all aside. But to say that one of the things that I think is important is to say that I don't think that God is sovereign. And I think that if we're going to try to keep having this conversation about how do we explain people doing evil things, if we're going to keep saying that God is giving us free will, it feels to me like it's a distraction. It's a lot of energy and it's a distraction from a bigger conversation. The issue for me about Hitler is that there were a lot of things going on and a lot of pieces, a lot of steps to that process, and a lot of pieces of, anger and misunderstanding and racism or out other people, antagonism. They're just a lot of pieces that to me, it isn't fair to say that God intended someone to choose good, to me, that is putting a lot of power and intention on a God who is just sitting there watching us do horrific things. And I'm interested in talking about God in such a way that we don't have to make that God observing us do horrific things to each other. I don't want to deal with that God, but I think it's caused a lot of confusion and harm, actually, that people over the centuries have tried to accommodate that God witnessing us be horrific. I'd rather shift my energy and attention on talking about humans in a way that's more respectful of who we are, and also empowers us to do the right thing, to work together for good, to work together to address situations like the rising fascism in this country, just like we saw in Germany in the 20s, 30s, and 40s.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Yoni Spinoza, this is Derek. I don't have a question, but thank you for your platform. I really appreciate it. Bless you, dude.
That's nice.
Really appreciate that. So much for the super chat. Let me get to our next one here. I am scrolling down. Robert, thank you for that super chat. I really appreciate that. I didn't see a question.
Just giving a little love.
Yeah,
Showing a little love. Here we go. Temi, I hope I'm saying your name properly. Forgive me if I didn't. Reading the Bible in a year plan and seeing Viking series Ragnar got me skeptical. Thanks for this channel, Derek. It's an eye-opener.
That's awesome.
Appreciate the compliment. I really do. Paul Cherry, that type of ideology that we are born sinful has had a substantial effect on society's development. If all life is sacred and God gave a, I think he's saying damn, then why did he not intervene when the priests were raping kids? So maybe we toss this to you, Selah, to have you kind of address what your thoughts are, because I think you would say God's in control.
Well, I mean, that's part of it. But the other part of it is that if we were pre-programmed to only do good, to love God, then we wouldn't be able to make any real choices or have any real consequences for our choices. And we have to understand, too, where this even idea that rape is wrong. I mean, I could read to you a quote from Nancy Pearcey that went over the book review of the history of rape that basically said was in it from MIT research, I believe. I might be wrong about that. And he was either an MIT researcher or an MIT researcher reviewed the book also. But it just went along this idea that under Darwinian influence, where we believe that all people are good, rape is justified because it's part of our natural genes and natural selection. So when we go into this question of we are born sinful, completely agree with that. That's why we see sin and consequences for the sin on the earth. Doesn't mean that the sin, if I was born blind, it doesn't mean that it was from my sin that I was born blind. It may be something more than that, that it's just a consequence of living in a fallen world, a world that we have parasites, where we have floods, whatever it might be. So it's not that all life is sacred, but there is consequences and there is horrible things that happen because we live in a fallen world.
If you want to give like a 60-second response, Dr. Bird, and we'll keep moving.
Shorter than what I normally do.
That's my nice way of saying, well, we got a lot more super chats.
No, I get it. I don't want to challenge Selah on what she said, because I think this is a really difficult topic. And I just think that the issue of rape and priests abusing power is just horrific. And I don't agree that we have to have God in our lives to know that rape is wrong. I don't agree with that. But I also just think that Selah has some really important things to say. So I'm just going to let it go.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. Back to Mr. Spinoza. By the way, controversial statement. That's capitalism, not full rights under socialism. Just saying. Thank you for the super chat, Mr. Spinoza. Dalai Lama in the house. Derek, love you providing these opportunities for young minds to meet experienced minds. Deep respect, Dr. Bird, Selah. Continue developing your intellectual experience.
That's lovely. Thank you, Dalai Lama.
Thank you. Going to the next one here. Robert Herring, thank you for that super sticker. Really appreciate it. Hope we get some questions here.
I know.
I like the questions.
I think they're like, nobody wants to touch it.
Well, yeah, that might be it. Humanist Reformation, thank you for the super chat. Numbers chapter 11 are Bible performed abortions. Abortions are a religious right.
I'm trying to think, what does Numbers 11 say? I'm thinking of 5 and 25, but what is Numbers? Hang on, Numbers 11? Do you happen to know what it's referring to, Selah? I don't.
I know the Exodus one that a lot of people quote as biblical abortion. A lot of it's taken either from out of context or as unintentional manslaughter too. But Numbers 11.
I don't know the part that's referring, because they're talking about the quails and the. Sorry, Humanist Reformation. I would love to join you on this conversation. I'm not sure what.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know if this was if they're trying to refer to the bitter, the certain drink that the woman that is accused of potentially
that. Oh yeah, accused of stepping
like
out.
Stepping out of their marriage with another man, and that if the baby is, it's like this seems to be a practice that if the baby is not really the father of her husband, then the baby should die in the process of drinking this thing that the priest would give them. Maybe you won't.
Yeah. If she's been cheating, then her uterus will drop, and if she hasn't been, then she'll be fine.
Thank you so much for that super chat.
I'm just like, okay. No, go ahead. It's just,
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks, Dr. Bird, for giving us a larger historical perspective, for showing love regardless of thought. Can you explain how the historical perspective has influenced your discussions with others?
I think the primary thing, hey, Charlotte, I just want to say hi. I think the primary thing for me is when I started learning about the historical development, I didn't initially have a feminist lens, and I wasn't initially upset that it was just a whole bunch of men making decisions. But over time, it did start to bother me. So there's that. And I think, just trying to be short about this, because I know we want to keep moving. I think it's a really interesting question. I do know, and that's, I mean, I appreciated that Selah started with historical context on a certain level. I just think it brings up more complexity. And I think that's more than anything, I think appreciating that we didn't get to where we are in a vacuum. We've inherited a whole bunch of things, a whole bunch of different traditions. Some are great, some are not so great.
Did you want to respond to any of that, Selah?
The issue of historical perspective. Yeah, how that affects the way you think and talk with others.
Sure. So yeah, historical perspective, I think, has been influential when we cross from the early church to the Reformation, even to the Renaissance. That definitely influences how we as a culture, even our Western culture, has inherited our ideas either regarding Christianity or where we're moving right now. If we look at early America compared to the year 2022, we see a lot of differences. So it definitely has influenced how I see things. And in response to the two of like, we're looking at it as a patriarch, I've seen definitely the founding fathers were the founding fathers. So we can call that patriarch if we want to. But it was also the founding fathers who made lots of the laws, or saying that life, all are created equal, and moving into the ideas of freedom of religion also.
Can I respond to that though? Because I think that it's important to note that several of the founding fathers had enslaved peoples in their property.
Sure, I think at least four.
So they didn't actually value all life the same.
Okay, yeah. So if we move away from that, not valuing all life the same, it was still, I mean, here in Texas, we have, I think, across all the nation too, that you can't drive and call or text or whatever it might be. I'm not sure what gender decided it. Might have been male, might have been female, but I don't say I'm not going to follow that law because it was created by a patriarchy. It's instead if something seems logical and rational for us to follow and use because it's for the better of either society and individuals, I think it's better for us to go with that worldview, no matter who supports it or who doesn't.
Okay.
All right, we'll keep pressing on. Emergency remedial truth. Thank you. Here's a donation to the cause. Thanks for this. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Humanist Reformation. This is great format, Derek. Nothing like open, transparent dialogue and debate. Now, if we could just see a debate on the fell prophecies of Jesus, especially with Matthew chapter 24. And I commented just for the audience that there will be a debate from someone who believes they're not failed and that they are failed later.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I like to get both sides. If there's going to be a debate, what's the point?
You do. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that super chat. Going to our next one here.
Derek's like, no, you don't get to respond to this.
There's no need to.
It's fine.
Apollo's Christian Apologetics. Thank you so much again for the super chat. Isn't it disingenuous to compare values of women to a fetus when the fetus is sacrificed in abortion, whereas the mother isn't guaranteed to die?
I thank you for asking that. I don't know. Do you want to start, Selah?
You can go ahead.
There are a lot of people who probably appreciate that you asked that, and I appreciate that you asked it. But for you to ask me if the 7-week-old fetus that I terminated, right? I ended the development of that fetus at 7 or 8 weeks. You're asking me to put that fetus, compare that fetus to me. It's a little bit overwhelming that you would even pose that question. That's my response. Is the lack of understanding why that is enraging. That's where I am with that you would put a fetus on equal ground with me or any woman, any pregnant person. Talk about human life, talk about sanctity of life. We're talking at a whole different level here. And there's not much more to say, I don't think.
Did you want to comment, Selah?
Yeah, sure. So, I know there's been a lot of talk about me and since I'm a little bit younger too, about my experience, but when I look back, it's not me saying whatever it might be. It's the backup of history and the backup of 95% biologists saying what life is. And so when we're looking at who gets to determine who can live or not, it's my understanding that the majority of people do say who can determine who can live or not depends on who has the viability to kill the fetus or the baby or not. And so I do agree that the fetus or the baby is sacrificed when the mom isn't guaranteed to die. So we have to come to an understanding of choosing that all life has value, or if life is dependent on how much experience, or value is dependent on how much experience you have and where you are at in life.
Yeah. Again, we're missing each other on that. And that's important for me to follow up on, because my experience is that of millions of women.
Okay, we'll keep pressing on. Dion Yassian, I always butcher names like this. Forgive me. If all life matters, how do you reconcile eating? So to paint a much more specific question, we kill animals to eat. So if all life it matters, you're eating steak or you're eating hamburger,
or even plants. You're terminating the life of a plant. Yeah.
Right.
If you're vegetarian. Yeah.
So how do each of you, we'll start with you, Selah, reconcile the fact that we're killing life in order to eat? Because what matters more? our survival, our lives versus the things we're eating. So
Sure.
yeah.
So, I mean, that's the reason why cannibalism is wrong, because I determine that human life is valuable, not all life. I'm not talking about, the weeds I have growing outside my house, or whatever plants might be there. I'm saying that all human life, or even if we were to use the terms that are commonly used today, that viability of possibly becoming human life is valuable.
And Dr. Bird, how do you reconcile it?
I am grateful for the plants and the seafood, the fish that someone catches for me. I'm grateful for those things, the animal or the living creature that is no longer living. I'm grateful for the way they nourish me, and I give thanks for that. And I'm mindful of that. And in a strange way, I know that I'm going to turn around and feed some of them in the cycle of life, right? When I die one day.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Shireen says, the Bible isn't anti-abortion, so why are you? Would you like to? Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So the Bible really talks about how all life has value. And we see this from the start when man is created in the image of God. So in other words, each man and woman are given divine being. We determine our value based on our creator. Just like if I had a Gucci bag compared to an off-brand bag, the Gucci bag is also going to be worth far more than a bag that was just a mimic of it because of the creator. Same thing here. All life has value because of the creator. So when it comes to this idea of anti-abortion, we see that life starts at conception. Human life starts at conception. So whatever that is determined as, then that human life has value, and therefore we don't have a right as people, or even in our US Constitution, to infringe the right of life on others and kill them.
Are you saying that you think that the Bible actually is anti-abortion, just so I'm clear?
For other than migrating parts or migrating circumstances, yes, the Bible is anti-killing children.
Mitigating circumstances? Is that what you're talking about? That there's some mitigating circumstances in which you think that the Bible,
pregnancies, something regarding that, of where the health of the mother is in decline if we're in a situation.
So here's where I'm just having a hard time. I'm not trying to question your beliefs on this one. I'm actually trying to make sure that we're clear about what you're drawing from the Bible and what isn't, because there's no reference to ectopic pregnancies in the Bible. And women are actually often talked about, not often, there are several women talked about drop out of the story after they've brought children into the world. So they've served their purpose. They're no longer needed in the story in terms of the Hebrew Bible. I find that to challenge some of what you're saying when you claim that you think that the Bible values life in this way. I think that there's some pieces to the Bible that challenge some of this. Humans are all equal and loved and all loved by God. So you do think that the Bible actually stands against abortion?
Yes.
Based on how you understand what abortion is in terms of the idea of it taking a life?
Yes, as what 95% of biologists say, yes.
I don't think that the Bible actually ever talks about the life situations that people face when they are facing an unplanned pregnancy. I don't think it ever talks about that. So it doesn't actually take head on the issue of the current life situations, the current realities that people are living in when they are faced with an unplanned pregnancy and how they are going to respond to it. So I don't think it's actually appropriate to say whether or not the Bible is anti-abortion or is pro-abortion, because it isn't speaking to the situations that people today are dealing with. I don't think it's fair to say the Bible is pro-abortion or anti-abortion. I don't think it's appropriate to raise that question.
Sure. I mean, the Bible doesn't talk about the internet, and yet we can see from clear Christian values that if you were to look at, let's say, child trafficking images on the internet, that would be wrong under many different circumstances, or all circumstances. And so when it comes to this idea that we have to look at the Bible, we look at it as descriptive, as talking about history. We look at it as telling us certain commands, and we look at the different values that it presents. So even the value I presented earlier in my speech regarding Jeremiah 1:5, talking about how God knew us in the womb. So he's saying that there is life and he knows who we are and who we are going to be. And so in other words, we have this description that all life does have value, whether you're in the womb or you are out of the womb. And that's when it comes to the idea of abortion. Now, the mitigating circumstances I talked about, I mean, that was really in reference to what we see in divorce. We have an idea of what marriage is according to the Bible. I know that you have a couple of different ideas regarding what biblical marriage is, but then he brings up divorce, how divorce isn't necessarily the option that was first presented, but under some circumstances, it is allowed.
Okay, I'm going to keep moving on to our other ones. We've got a lot of super chats here. I really appreciate the support. Abel Chavez, what about a fallen God creating this world, like a demiurge type of God, and that God being the son of a higher God, the inversion or opposite?
I mean, sure. When we're looking at that type of question, it kind of reminded me, when I first heard it, it reminded me of something that the Iliad would have, of these little gods ruling the earth all over. And most of them were what we can say fallen. They didn't always uphold the justice. We see some of them lying to each other, cheating, exchanging money between hands, bribing each other, whatever it might have been. But instead, we see a good God from the Christian worldview and from the Bible showing a great earth, but because of our free will and because of the choices we've made throughout this world is fallen, but we still have a good, loving God.
I'm not a big fan of talking about fallenness and sinfulness. Those have been really harmful in my worldview in the past. So when I look at the world, I see that it's a mess right now. It's a big hot mess. But I also see a lot of good going on. So I'm not interested in trying to make a definitive claim about the original mover or creator and whether that original God was maybe actually slightly mischievous or evil or sinful or whatever. Like, I think those are fun stories. And I think that's an interesting way to try to wrestle with the fact that it'd be nice if this was a perfect place, but it's not. I understand why people have these stories and myths, but I'm sorry, Abel. I don't find it as, I don't find it as helpful, I guess, to try to pin the fault on the creator for us not being perfect. I just would rather us spend time trying to figure out how to be better people together,
Thank you so much. Aramsali, I hope I'm saying that right. Forgive me if I didn't. Myth Vision, Selah, opinion, Deuteronomy 22:18, and was this Nobs? Or is it Numbers?
Numbers?
Okay. Numbers, yeah.
Numbers, yeah.
And if I could read, I got Deuteronomy 22:18 up. It says, and it's in the context, then the father of the young woman and her mother shall take and bring out the evidence of her virginity to the elders of the city in the gate. Okay, so if a man takes a wife and goes into her and then hates her and accuses her of misconduct and brings a bad name upon her, saying, I took this woman, and when I came near her, I did not find her evidence of virginity. Then the father of the young woman and her mother shall take and bring out the evidence of her virginity to the elders in the city of the gate. And the father of the young woman shall say to the elders, I gave my daughter to this man to marry, and he hates her. And behold, he accused her of misconduct, saying, I did not find in your daughter evidence of virginity, and yet this is evidence of my daughter's virginity. And they shall spread the cloak before the elders of the city. Then the elders of that city shall take the man and whip him. And I think then there's a fine of 100 shekels of silver, and give them to the father of the young woman, because he has brought a bad name upon a virgin of Israel. What are your thoughts on that passage?
Yeah, sure. So I know that was a very common practice. It was built into that culture, especially when it came to knowing if you were a virgin or not. And that type of procedure was very common among them and among that culture in order to do so. So we see those ideas already coming forth. So we have parts of the Bible that are descriptive, and we have parts of the Bible that tells value, as we already talked about. And so when we're looking at that, then I think it's more of a descriptive of telling us how the procedure was done and what a value, when you take away the lesson from that, the value of being able to be a virgin and giving up that wonderful gift of being able to bond with your husband. And so when it comes to that too, even disgracing the wife's name out of no means to, out of misconduct was extremely wrong. That was wrong on the part of him. And so we saw that process that would happen if someone were to disrespect the family name even.
Did you want to make a brief comment and then I'll read Numbers 31:18? Or can we go ahead and read it? Okay. I didn't want to be rude and cut you off. So Numbers 31:18 is Balaam's advice caused the people of Israel to act treacherously against the Lord in the incident of Peor. And so the plague came upon the congregation of the Lord. Now, therefore, kill every male among the little ones and kill every woman who has known man by lying with him. But all the young girls who have not known man by lying with him, keep alive for yourselves. What do you think about this? What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. I know a lot of people like to mention these type of Bible verses like, well, how can God be a good God if he would allow this type of killing and whatever it might be for that? But once again, we go to this idea of value. What does God value and how are you supposed to go through with that? So we see that once again, we're valuing this idea of being able to save yourself and being able to have an idea of obeying God's laws. And we go even further into that. So under that, that was very descriptive, something that was called to do against that nation by God. And so we see that happen many times throughout the Old Testament. And it just proves of God's justice, of not being able to allow evil things go undone, or not being allowed or being able to praise good things. But ultimately, everything is under the sovereignty of God. And we see even throughout the Old Testament, we carry through this storyline of being able to present Christ as the ultimate sacrifice in the New Testament.
Am I understanding you correctly that you think that God is behind that claim, that thing in Numbers about telling people to kill the women and boys, but keep the virginal women for yourself? That God's behind that? Did I understand you correctly?
Sure. So when we're looking at that, I know that God is ultimately sovereign over everything.
Okay.
And so what I said before, a lot of it comes from the consequences of our sin, living in a fallen world when some, bad thing does happen. But ultimately, though, it is God being sovereign over all, which is justice over all too. It might not be some things that we can fully understand to our own lives, but it's something more so according to the bigger picture.
It's funny. I see that issue in Numbers about men actually just valuing women who haven't been penetrated yet, just wanting to. I just think it's really stunning that there's a passage in the Bible that talks about collecting virginal girls for yourself.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Chris Billups. Selah, what verses demonstrate God's approval of worshiping other gods? This seems necessary for your freedom of religion claim to be true.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So when we come to this idea of, I can't name any verses off of my head, but the values that are being presented under such idea that we see God, or I can mention Ezra 7 that went on where we had that king who allowed all types of worship to happen, but he didn't compel any worship. Then I could point out Nebuchadnezzar, what happened with Daniel. He compelled some form of worship from Daniel and his friends. And ultimately we see that as being wrong, as trying to uphold some type of religion of me, instead of looking at the different consciences being able to worship freely. So that's why we have this freedom of religion, or that separation of church of state. It's not so that way the church takes over the state and gets to have all these laws, or gets to say, all right, we're going to have, something mentioning God on the dollar bill. But instead we go more into it of allowing this freedom of religion and separation of church state So that way the state can't say what the church can or should believe, or is able to dictate how a church service may go. So this is where the real difference comes at hand and why we understand it to be true.
It's a fascinating way of handling those ideas and those scriptures. The question of where does God's approval of worshiping other gods come in? I would suggest that the Hebrew Bible in particular is very clear that God is not okay with people worshiping other gods. I hear what you're saying about not forcing worship, and that there are times when that's appreciated in the scriptures, but there are time and time again, the Israelites are judged and slaughtered or conquered because they have taken up the worship of the gods they used to worship. I just think that's worth noting. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Thank you so much. Dalai Lama is back. I think they're trying to tell us something. Selah, do you engage with people outside of your faith you would consider morally or ethically sound? And have you engaged them in how they came to their theories of living? If not, why not?
Oh, I definitely have.
Lovely question.
Yes. No, I mean, part as being a Christian, especially me being an individual, not talking about the state and whether it's logical for the state to adopt a Christian perspective, but as an individual, it's very important for me to love my neighbor, no matter who my neighbor is, and to go forth with that because of the love of God. And so I've definitely talked to different people, some who I don't consider morally or ethically sound, some who I do very much admire their morals and their ethics when it comes to their family life or how they conduct themselves, or even how it comes down to the way they talk. And so I have engaged. We do have lots of conversations. I've grown up in speech and debate. It's very common for us to have different conversations about what is currently happening in the world or whatever it might be. And we have came to different conclusions, but at the end, we both respect each other with large amounts of respect, but also realize that there's differences in our salvation in what is true and what is not.
Thank you so much for that super chat, Dolly, and showing up multiple times, helping support the channel. I do appreciate it. Jennifer Silves, thank you. Good to see you here. Selah, how do you say the Bible opposes non-consent when if men pay the fathers, it's all good in God's eyes? And I think to give more context to this, because it's a situation where a rape, if I'm using the context right, there's a rape. Remember when Abraham ends up in a village nearby, and one of the sons of the neighboring tribe rapes his daughter.
It's actually Jacob's daughter, but yeah.
Is it? I thought it was Abraham. I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, just it's Jacob's daughter, Dinah.
He was supposed to marry him. Maybe that's not the one. Maybe there's somewhere in the law that like
there is.
You can pay. Okay, so anyway, like, what are your thoughts about the idea that it's like paying retribution of that? Would you go back into the original context and say, well, in the ancient world, this is how things work? Or anyway.
I mean, yeah, it's partially so. That's the culture that they were surrounded by, and what we see as being very influential. And so when it comes to this idea that the man has to pay the father, it was more so not just through consent. The daughters and many of the women there understood that this is how their culture worked and how it was to do so. Our culture has dramatically changed over the years when it comes down to that. But we see as God saying that, first off, even when it comes to the idea of marriage in the Bible, we see a lot of women respecting their husbands, but then the husbands also loving their wives so much that they would lay down their lives for them. So there is an idea even in the New Testament too, when it comes down how we are to resemble marriage, or even when it comes to dating or even engagements. We see lots of ideas from there too.
Thank you so much. Jennifer said, super challenging getting that worded so it would post, because you can only put so many words into a super chat. Well, I thank you, Jennifer. I hope I didn't step on your question by adding extra to it that maybe you weren't meaning. So forgive me on that. Clark Morlich, Second Temple source for Genesis 3, Eve as gaining wisdom.
Second Temple source I'm not aware of, but I do know that I learned it from a rabbi to read Genesis 3 as a step up for humankind, as compared to seeing it through the Christian lens of it being about original sin. I was set free by the Jewish reading that someone showed me. I'm sorry I can't direct you to a specific source.
Thank you so much for the super chat there, Clark. I do appreciate it. Humanist Reformation. Again, thank you for showing up. Sorry, it was Exodus and the bitter water. They killed fetus in religious rites. Abortion is a religious right. So I think it was Exodus, I said, and the bitter water.
I do know, yeah, the Exodus verse, that makes a lot more sense. And I know even like Exodus, what is it? Exodus 23. I know it's when they go into this idea of two men are fighting and one of them hits the woman, then if the woman has a miscarriage, or a lot of versions will say have the child earlier on, but this child be fine. So if we're going, I'm not exactly sure what chapter it is from Exodus regarding the bitter water, or if he's referring, or if they're referring to Exodus 23. But I mean, when it comes down to Exodus and bitter water too, that's what it was for the cultural norm of respecting certain values among that culture.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. Moving on. Ronald, thank you for that super chat there, Ronald. I did not see a question, just showing support. So I do seriously appreciate that support. Alan Bird, God has free will. We are made in God's image with free will. So respecting our free will, why could God not have made us so we would not sin?
That's a great question. That's a question that is brought about a lot in the apologetics I used to do. And so when we come down to it, we were created with a choice of being able to choose obedience or choose disobedience. Now, God is one that is holy. He, under no circumstances, can sin. We can see like it's even hard to be near sin because of how holy he is. So I do agree that he has all power and all knowledge, but he is so holy compared to anything. His holiness is above all. So for us, we have that decision to choose obedience or disobedience. And at the end, we chose disobedience most of the day too, if we were to look at the law of God. And so that's why we do have a sinful nature and sin now. Now in heaven, it'll be different. We won't have that desire to sin because we're going to be so near to God that there's no longer going to be that part of us. But when it comes down to it, it's free will out of love that we do have it.
Thank you for your response. And Alan, for the question.
Please. Can I respond just briefly to that? The idea that I just want to push back a little bit, that I disagree with your beliefs, that that Genesis 3 is about obedience or disobedience, because in Genesis 2, God is actually setting a trap and is being sneaky and is actually lying, if you're going to read it literally in that kind of a way. I think there's something really powerful about being able to see Genesis 2 and 3 as a myth, and to be able to set aside Paul's misreading into Genesis 3. Just food for thought.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Kathura, forgive me if I butchered your name. Dr. Bird, thank you for sharing your personal story, and I'm thankful that you had that choice. Know that you were heard.
Yeah, thanks, Kathura. I am thankful I had the choice as well, and I had a place to do it safely. I had a place that supported me, and made sure I came back 2 weeks later and make sure everything went well. I'm really grateful for that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that super chat. Ronald, I'll just call you Ronald. I don't want to butcher your last name. Based on what Jesus said about women, and in light of the culture, Greek, Roman, and Hebrew at the time, was Jesus more of a chauvinist or pro-women's rights?
What do you think, Selah?
I would say that he was more of a pro-women's rights when it comes down to it. In light of that culture that really disregarded women and treated them as second-class citizens, even more like slaves than anything, we saw that Jesus stepped up and allowed women in this group. Even in the Bible, we have 2 chapters dedicated, Ruth and Esther, to women, when culturally that would not have been acceptable. Even at the tomb, it would have been more appropriate for Jesus to say, let's have 2 men come meet me, so that way my story looks a little bit more reliable when it comes to anybody who disagrees or doesn't believe that to be true. And so instead we saw 2 women, and even these women are carried out throughout the New Testament, or even Paul mentions many women throughout his letters too, and thanking them.
Mhm. It's interesting. I actually appreciate what you've said there, in particular about the tomb. That if they wanted the story to be really well respected, you wouldn't have had a woman there at all 4 empty tomb scenes. I think that's really important to note. I also think it's really great that some of the things that Jesus says to, like, Martha Mary's story. I love the way Jesus affirms Mary choosing what she wants to do instead of giving into cultural expectations. But I also know that there's some times when I read Jesus, I could be wrong, but I read him as being a little bit dismissive or rude towards women. I don't want to make a big deal of it, except for to say, I think it's important that we be able to read it that way. That might actually be an honest portrayal of Jesus at the time. But I also want to say that Jesus wasn't necessarily any different from other Jewish rabbis at the time. So some of the positive things that we do see Jesus doing, we also saw other Jewish rabbis doing. Just want to throw that out there.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Topic discussed. My friend Gary, go subscribe to his YouTube channel. Really appreciate the support. I recently got in trouble with my church for a YouTube video I made on the importance of termination of pregnancy for women's health. We seem to forget, as humans and families, we all will face making life and death decision for our loved ones. And I know that he works in the medical field. So
thank you for standing up for women, and in such a way, right? That you got in trouble for trying to be honest about some of the things you see and the people you've interacted with. I appreciate that and respect that.
I thought he was going to get in trouble because he's shown up on my live chats and we've had really controversial Bible talks and stuff. Mm-hmm. But no, it ends up being this. And so thank you, Gary, for showing some love and super chatting. Mm-hmm. I definitely need the help. So thank you. Mm-hmm. David Christopher, Selah, although I'm an atheist, I feel that humans valuing life is an inherent feeling. Would you agree? Love and respect to all of you. Thank you, David.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really great. So it's not a feeling for me. It's something logical. Feelings are great, but they're not final. I might feel like eating an entire chocolate cake, but it's probably not what's healthiest for me. So when it comes down to it, I say it's logical and a part of the value that God gives, that human life has value. It's not something I per se feel, but something that is said and something that we see throughout culture is if we give human life value, then we allow for more good than bad to happen. If not killing innocent groups like the Jews during the Holocaust.
Did you want to make a comment there?
I'm not sure if it's appropriate for me to. This was a comment or question for Selah.
There were so many like that, though. I mean, I
think I just want to say, I think part of what David Christopher's trying to say here is, I don't think he struggles to value human life. It's just the way he functions. It's the way he's wired. I don't think he needs a God watching over him to make sure that he values human life. And I think that's an important experience that billions of people have had, as just perspective.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Temi says, Selah, can you shed more light on Deuteronomy 18 through 21 on stoning one's son for being rebellious? You want me to read it or?
I think I have the grasp of it. Okay. And so, when we're looking at the Old Testament, we saw that sin has consequences. That's what it comes down to. But thankfully, under the law of the New Testament, we now have this idea that by the grace of God, we can ask for the forgiveness of 21. 18,
sorry, I'm so
no, you're totally all good. No problem at all. And so when we come down to it, the New Testament has a new law for us that's under grace and under mercy. And so we can ask for the forgiveness of our sins because Christ paid it all for us. And so we see consequences and values equated to that. There is consequences to when you sin, but thankfully Christ had already paid those for us.
Thank you for your response. Did you want to make a comment, Dr. Berg? You pulled out a book, so I didn't know if you were trying to make a comment or something.
Well, I had just wanted to read it because I'm not as familiar with the passage as Selah is. And if someone has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey his father and mother, who does not heed them when they discipline him, when his father and his mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of his town at the gate of that place. They shall say to the elders of his town, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey us. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of the town shall stone him to death. So you shall purge the evil from your midst, and all Israel will hear and be afraid. I'm sorry, I was really distracted by trying to find the biblical passage, and I think if I understood correctly, Selah, your response to this is really just that Jesus essentially establishes a new law and a new covenant, or a new way of handling the consequences of sin. Is that?
Yes, we have a new covenant of grace. So no matter what our sin is, we are allowed salvation because of what Christ did on the cross for us. So there still is consequences to our sin. There's no denying that. If I were to cheat on a test and a teacher found out, I mean, there's going to be consequences to that. But when it comes down to it, that can be forgiven because of Christ.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I think I just want to highlight very quickly is this issue of picking and choosing when we want to uphold a biblical law from the Hebrew Bible, and when we're okay replacing it with the new love and forgiveness that comes through Jesus in the Newer Testament. We either take them all or we don't. And I think that I think it's understandable to want to say, I mean, so I think that's important. The other piece I want to raise is this kind of a thing I think does get to the point you raise about some of these are descriptive and they tell us about the worldview and the people at the time, right? It's not necessarily prescriptive, but I also think it's important to recognize that this particular way of disciplining, this extreme form of discipline, is something we see God unleashing on the Israelites time and time again as well. So it isn't just particular to this one incident is now replaced by Jesus, because God behaves in this kind of extreme disciplining way as well. I think that's worth considering.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Few more here and we'll wrap things up. Raf, sorry, Deuteronomy 21:18, and call me Raf. So we just read from there. So thank you so much for that super chat. Topic discuss. Selah, do you consider Mormons Christian?
Sure. So Latter-day Saints, I know a lot of them do go under this idea of being Christian. So that's a different label. When it comes down to it, I believe that salvation is a work of grace, not by your works alone. So Latter-day Saints, I believe, are different than Christian or evangelical Christians. But that's nothing to say that they can't say that they are Christians. Our beliefs are different when it comes to salvation. So there is a divide between us.
Thank you.
It's interesting because I thought you were going to get to the point where they don't believe in a triune God, because that's actually what makes them questionable in terms of
that
Christian.
part too. So, I mean, there's many different factors that involve why Latter-day Saints are different than Christians, but there's no means to disrespect them or, I know they've experienced lots of hardships and a lot of hatred for what they believe. So it definitely, when it comes down to it, I'm friends, we don't have any hatred or disrespect for each other whatsoever.
Thank you so much. And Jennifer Silves. No, it was the wording. I couldn't even put.
Yeah, I knew that. I was wondering that too.
Oh, okay. Also press Selah. God says this is a good way to marry. It's in the law. Cannot punish the man, and the girl must marry him.
I think this might be a reference to Exodus 22.
Is this that case where if a man rapes a girl and then he has to then marry his rape?
Correct. Okay. Yes. When a man seduces a virgin who is not engaged to be married and lies with her, he shall give the bride price for her and make her his woman. But if her father refuses to give her to him, he shall pay the bride price equal to the bride price for virgins. I think that's what Jennifer Silvas is referring to.
What do you think about the idea, if I were to get very specific, that a woman who is raped by a man is then really has no say technically? It's the father's decision with the guy who raped her that, hey, you owe me shekels of silver for my daughter, and then he must marry her for the rest of his life. What do you think about that?
Sure. So once again, we're going back to how that culture viewed marriage and how we viewed how to treat girls and how to treat men, or men and women. And so we see something different in the New Testament, once again, as I already stated, about talking biblical marriage, about a man loving his wife so much that he would lay down his life for her. And so when it comes down to it, we see that rape isn't something that's necessarily justified, especially in the New Testament, by God or by the Bible or even by Christian values. And so we have this idea that is a part of that culture decision to do so. And then B, we see a difference when it comes to the ideas of grace and even how marriage is supposed to be upheld.
I'd like to suggest that in the Newer Testament, there are also passages that many Christian men have used over the centuries to justify treating their women, their wives, however they feel like. And in fact, the concept of rape within marriage is in terms of being on the law books, it has only been at the end of the 20th century that the states in this country actually made it illegal for a man to rape his wife. And in fact, this legislation was brought before the Tennessee state legislature 15 years in a row. And it was denied because the Christian men in that legislature said, I can do whatever I want to my wife. It isn't rape. What is startling to me is you are referring to Ephesians 5, a verse in Ephesians 5, yes, that does say that men are to lay down their lives as Christ did for the church. But you're also ignoring the same context, which says that women are to be submissive to their husbands as they are to the Lord. And the other passages in the Newer Testament that tell women to be submissive to their men. This is also just like the one you've pointed out in there. And men have chosen time and time again to use it. It is a Christian value to say that women are to be submissive to their husbands. That is a Christian value because it is in Christian scripture, in the same passage you have referenced about men needing to love their wives, which, yes, at the time was progressive. I'm not denying it, right? I'll agree with you on that. Like, that was progressive to say a man should love his wife, treat her as something other than property. What in the world, right? That was progressive. Yeah, way to go. But it's also in the same context as still reinforcing that women are to be subject to their men.
I want to be fair and let Selah respond to that as
Yeah.
we're exiting this. Give her the last word on this one.
Okay. Sure.
No, yes, thank you. Yeah, for sure. So when we're looking at it, once again, yes, I do agree that it says in the Bible for women or for wives, not women to men, but wives to husbands, to be submissive to their husbands. And so when it comes down to it, though, and when we put it in the context of today, or even through the context of marriage in the New Testament, it wasn't them saying, all right, well, the man decides that he wants to go to Chick-fil-A and the wife decides she wants to go someplace else. It came down to important decisions that were being made. And not only that, but being submissive is one thing to her husband and to Lord, but the man is also to be submissive to the governing authorities that were there at the time. The man is also to be submissive to the church, whatever church fathers he was under. And not only that, but he had to lay down his life in a circumstance for his wife, while wives were not called to do so.
Thank you so much for your response. Humanist Reformation, we got to fight the Bible with the Bible. All of our religious rights are under attack.
Yeah, I think that's the most striking thing for me. One of the most striking things for me in seminary was realizing that there are so many of these issues, we can back up both sides of the issue using scripture. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Appreciate that, Humanist. Did you want to comment on that, or?
Can I follow up really quickly? I know, Derek, you want to go, but I just need to clarify something. And this was just because, Selah, you said something. You corrected me when you said wives to their husbands. In the Greek, there isn't a word for wife and husband. It's just man and woman. It's the same as in the Hebrew Bible. There isn't a separate noun to say husband and wife. It's just man and woman, man and woman. The English translators put married labels. I just want to be clear about that. That's not me. That's the Greek and the Hebrew.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. I do appreciate your super chat, Humanist. And topic discussed. Thank you for the super chat here. We're wrapping things up. I've got one more popping in. Dr. Bird, I'm impressed with how patient you have been during this live chat. What advice do you have for those of us who were feeling very triggered by some of what we were hearing from the other side?
I didn't do so well when it was just the two of us on the screen. I realized I was doing a lot better having Derek's presence, just to be honest. Just a reminder to keep it real and respectful. I actually almost started to cry listening to Derek read that, because I think it's important for us to be respectful. One of the things that I try to hold in mind is I want to understand other people. I want to understand where other people are coming from. But it's not addressing your comment about feeling triggered. I think my advice is to take a deep breath and to wish someone else well when they are saying something that feels that is causing that for you, and to stick with what you have control over.
Thank you so much, Gary, for the super chat. I really appreciate that. We are getting close here. I'm just making sure I don't miss anything. Forgive me. And then I'll have you both do a 2-minute little outro, if you will. Abel, thank you again. God is a serpent equals life is a... Maybe this is Genesis in a nutshell. One saying is old school. The latter is new school. I have never heard anything like this.
This is interesting.
Thank you for the super chat.
I mean, I know, Selah, I'm happy to have you go first, but I'm just going to chime in real quick. I mean, it's interesting because which kind of a serpent are we talking about? Like the serpent that Christianity came up with, or are we talking about in Genesis, serpents actually are the deliverers of knowledge, right? I mean, and historically speaking, the ancient Near East, had serpents involved with healing and wisdom and insight. So I think the serpent is referenced in Genesis 3 for all those kinds of reasons. And it's a Christian development to say that a serpent is evil and the devil embodied or something like that. So again, as a biblical scholar, I want to push back on what happens to be kind of misreadings really of these scriptures. I like to take them very seriously. But anyway, I think Genesis in general is saying that it's a bit of a crapshoot. There's a lot of mess out there, right?
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. Paul Cherry, in response to both Alan Bird and Selah, if God is holy and therefore cannot sin, do certain things like getting drunk, for example, then God is limited by his own nature, then he cannot have free will. I don't know if you understand the question.
If I'm understanding it correctly, it's saying that God is holy and can't sin, but sinning includes being drunk, or no, sin, he can't. He's limited. He's not omnipotent. Is that what I'm understanding correctly? I hope.
I'm not
I
sure.
think it's actually getting at whether or not having the freedom, the fullness of being God actually includes all possibilities. Because if God is limited, right?
Yeah, sure. So when we go with that, God is holy, and so thus no sin can come from him or through him. But he's not limited in that sense. He's omnipotent, and we see him have full knowledge and full power. He cannot sin, though. So it's not a sin to do so. It's like asking a question of like, can God make a rock that's so big that he can't even carry it? It's not one of those questions. We're getting down to the fact that he is holy, and thus that's where he has this idea of justice, of good and evil, of that moral code. And not only that, but he has all sovereign power regarding that. And even before I go on, I wanted to apologize once again throughout today that if I ever came across as rude, and I didn't realize that you were upset. I'm so sorry about that by the earlier comment too.
No, thank you. That's nice of you to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Vesper, Jesus quoted from the book of Daniel, a forgery written in the 2nd century rather than 6th. By Christian logic, wouldn't that make him a false prophet? Now, I think would have a contention with the forgery part, I would suspect, Selah.
I do. I'm not that knowledgeable regarding that exact idea of the forgery. But when we have it, I mean, it's pretty clear if you compare it to Roman Greek and how they presented the Iliad, the Aeneid, whatever it might have been, they had different ways of creating those prophecies, which was writing them after something had already happened. And if we were to even ignore that part regarding the book of Daniel, there are numerous prophecies from Isaiah throughout many books in the Old Testament that did come true.
Thank you so much for your response. I appreciate it. So if it was a forgery, though, if Daniel was, just to be more direct, so I'm fairly giving him a shake on his super chat here. If it was a forgery, and let's say Daniel was giving a lot, like most academics think, most of Daniel will like show somewhat of a hazy ancient history, doesn't quite get it all. Then he's like pinpoint accurate in the 2nd century. Then he gets everything after a certain time wrong. If Jesus was quoting in that, and I was saying, let's say that is true. Let's just imagine that was true. Would that make Jesus a false prophet, assuming he believed that Daniel was written in the 6th century? If it really wasn't, would you think that would?
So we're looking at the ideas of different centuries that are taking place. It's not saying that he'll be conceived or he will be a virgin birth. It's different than that. And then on top of that, I don't have the knowledge or the background regarding 2nd century or 6th century. So I don't really feel the need or know how to answer the question with all the utmost logic and evidence behind me. I just don't have that currently. And so it doesn't make as much sense for me to answer an open-ended question when in reality it hinges on that 2nd century or 6th century.
I guess I think the questioner's kind of saying, like, if this is the case, would Jesus be a false prophet? If he said things that didn't come true or something, I guess you would say yes, but you would
yes.
you would say he didn't, right?
No, I would say that if he did say something that wasn't true, that he wasn't going to come, or that he was going to have a virgin birth and then it wasn't a virgin birth, then that would make him a false prophet, yes. Or something along the lines of that he is going to rise in 3 days and doesn't, then yes, that would be a false prophet.
Thank you for the super chat, Vesper. Topic discuss. Are we able to make more super chats, Derek, or do you need to end with a super chat? You asked, Gary.
I know. How respectful is that?
Yeah, I mean,
I've got a little left in me if you want to keep going.
I don't want to go too much longer. I want to be respectful of Selah. Selah has a celebration.
She does. She's I totally forgot about that.
Yes.
She's gonna get to celebrate.
If you want to drop a super chat, go for it, Gary. I appreciate the love, of course. All the help is needed, of course, especially in the time I'm moving. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It's tough moving, all the expenses, the travel, the gas right now. Goodness gracious.
Indeed. To get across country right now. Yikes.
Yes. So Jennifer Silves, thank you, Selah and Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the super chat. We ran out, Gary.
Mm-hmm.
I'll take it if we get through our outros and it's there. By the time we get done, we'll take a quick one. Boom. How about that? So let's start our outro. Is it fair to say 3 minutes apiece? I was thinking
I don't even need that much time.
I'm good with whatever.
Okay, I'll give you 3 to be fair. Dalai Lama. Last one from Dalai Lama. Thank you, Selah and Dr. Bird.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to have you full screen here. So it's just you. And let's go ahead and start it.
All right, well, I'll go ahead and start my timer then. And so when we're looking over today, we really came down to the question, is Christianity the logical worldview? And throughout the evidence I've brought up through today's speeches and responses, and what was brought up in my first and second speech especially, we see evidence all from the Roman and Greek stating that this was the more logical worldview for them when it came to the freedom of religion, when it came to no longer sacrificing children or killing innocent girls, and especially those who were deformed. And instead moving to this idea that Christianity was the more logical worldview. And we have to understand the history behind it. I know we didn't talk about it throughout today as much as I would have liked to, but it was millions of people from a very well-known and respected culture, or even lots of learned class, including Aristotle, Socrates, and many other of the elite and learned class, who were saying that many of the Christian values were something that we should move towards. And that's something that we really have to come to at the end of the day. Us here in America are moving away from the Christian worldview. So we have to decide which one will be better for us. How will we preserve life better? What will make our state better if we were to move through with a different worldview? Should we keep the one that we currently have, or should we move to something that would be better for everyone? Not just including the individual. I believe individual salvation and you as an individual are highly important and valuable, but it's also important for us to look at the state itself. I use numerous examples, including what was even brought up regarding how the scientific world was influenced by the Christian worldview. We see Galileo and Sir Francis Bacon taking a lot of ideas coming forth of being able to want the Christian worldview and understanding science because of it. Well, we don't see Aristotle doing the same thing. In fact, even throughout, if we were going to increase it more, we see orphanages and charities being brought up in the early church and in the early pagan societies of Roman and Greek, because we realized that life is sacred. We didn't see this anywhere else. I completely agree that we have numerous NGOs, numerous organizations, orphanages all around the world that all don't identify under being Christian. But it's the premise at hand that was started first was because of Christianity. And we see this carry through to the 21st century. All that I've said today isn't from myself, my experience, or even what is current for me. But instead, it's backed up by lots of history from Roman Greek. It's backed up by different supporters and different beliefs in the Bible itself. So at the end of the day, I would strongly say that Christianity is the logical worldview, not only for the value of life, but for the betterment of the state, for increasing something that is better in our scientific community, and more. So I would strongly say that Christianity is the more logical worldview in comparison to what we have now and what we've ever had before or in the culture right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your closing statement. And Dr. Bird, I'm going to give you 3 minutes as well, just in case you want to use it. And I'll butt in if we go past. How about that? All right. Let me unmute you and pop you up on the screen.
So I just wanted to say that I'm grateful to Selah for having the courage to come have this conversation and this exchange with me. There were a lot of things said in this exchange that were well thought through ideas and convictions that I hope that will change and expand as you experience life and as you listen to more and more people's life experiences. I was very convinced of truth and correctness and righteousness and the right way of living when I was an evangelical. And I had to start listening to other people and to people beyond my worldview to start to see why someone would say things like, salvation is about fixing the problems in this world. It doesn't have anything to do with heaven or hell. People are already living in hell in this lifetime. Salvation is about fixing those problems, going to the source of those. And in fact, there is a biblical thread that endorses that definition of salvation. This whole conversation tonight, from my perspective, is about how we're going to choose to engage the Bible and to what end. And I very deeply respect Selah and her compassion and her patience and her discipline in preparing for a conversation like this. And I appreciate the time that she's given to preparing for this and in standing up for her convictions in this conversation. I just know that I am a much better Christian now than I was when I was an evangelical. And I don't even consider myself a Christian anymore. That's really all I have to say at the end of 3 hours of this. So thanks.
This was definitely a wonderful conversation. I learned a lot from both ends. We did have topic discuss, drop a 50 bomb. Everybody in the chat,
Lots of
show
love.
him some love. Seriously, give topic discuss a round of applause, if you will, for helping out. And
Thanks, topic.
seriously. And then again, you never told me you were moving. You better call me. All right, I'm calling you. I'll be calling
What
you.
a great friend.
Seriously, that tells you I have his number, obviously. So, thank you. Let me drop that super chat. I want to say thank you to you, Selah. You've never come on here, and you're young, you're brilliant, you are passionate. I'm very thankful that you came on and had this conversation. We can beat up Jonathan later for any other issues. Jennifer, thank you so much for Dr. Bird. We're friends. That's why I feel comfortable. Thank you so much for coming back and having this conversation, especially in the situation we're in right now in America. So relevant. And I didn't know it was going to go that way. In fact, I swear I did not know that this was what the conversation was going to be. But I'm glad I had 2 women on here doing it instead of me. And so I just want to say thank you so much.
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Yes,
Maybe
thank
we'll
you so
have,
much.
yeah, maybe we could do more in the future on something else. And I appreciate you. Never forget, we
We
are Myth Vision.